She was carrying a tray of champagne glasses worth more than her monthly rent when the woman grabbed her uniform and tore it open in front of 300 people. Not by accident, deliberately, slowly, like she wanted everyone to watch. The fabric ripped across Nia's shoulder with a sound that cut through the music, through the laughter, through 11 years of silence she had kept to protect a secret that was never supposed to matter anymore. And standing at the top of that grand marble staircase, in the house she had cleaned every morning for 2 years, the most dangerous man in Chicago saw the scar she had hidden beneath that uniform and stopped breathing. If that had been you, if someone had torn your clothes in front of hundreds of strangers to humiliate you, what would you have done? If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next inside that ballroom will stay with you long after it's over. Hit like, drop a comment with the city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning it happened, Nia Bellamy burned the eggs. That was the thing she remembered later, not the gala, not the torn uniform, not the 300 faces staring at her like she was something that had crawled onto their marble floor by mistake. She remembered standing at her own kitchen stove at 6:15 in the morning, phone wedged between her ear and shoulder, listening to her son's school leave another voicemail about unpaid fees, and smelling the eggs she'd already forgotten twice that week. Caleb walked in while she was scraping the pan. 13 years old, already almost as tall as she was, wearing the same pair of sneakers he'd had since 7th grade. He looked at the eggs. He looked at her face. And he did what he always did. He picked up 2 granola bars from the cabinet, handed her one without a word, and went to pour his own orange juice. "It's fine, Mom," he said, even though she hadn't spoken. "I didn't say anything. You had the face." "What face?" "The one where you're doing math in your head and losing." She wanted to laugh. She did, a little. But her chest felt the way it always felt in the mornings, like something was sitting on it that she hadn't figured out how to move yet. The voicemail was the 4th one this month, about the AP program fees. Caleb was smart enough to qualify 3 times over, but smart didn't pay the materials deposit, the field study registration, or whatever new administrative cost the school had invented since the last time she checked. She'd set aside $47 last week. The deposit was $210. She dropped the granola bar into her bag, pulled on her coat, and kissed the top of his headziff the way she'd done since he was small enough to carry. "Don't be late," she said. "Don't burn anything else," he said. The bus ride to the North Shore took 51 minutes. Nia had counted it enough times to know exactly where to sit to avoid the draft from the rear doors, which section of the ride had the worst cell service, and precisely how many stops she had to close her eyes before she felt ready to walk through the service entrance of the Valeri estate. She had worked inside that house for 2 years and 3 months. In that time, she had cleaned 17 bathrooms, ironed more tablecloths than she could count, polished enough silverware to fill a small museum, and kept every single one of her secrets, exactly where she had buried them, deep, quiet, undisturbed. She was good at that, staying invisible. It wasn't a talent she'd been born with. It was one she'd built, piece by piece, starting with the year she turned 22 and made a decision in a hospital room that changed the direction of her entire life without her fully understanding how permanent that change would be. She didn't think about that anymore. That was the rule she'd made herself. The Valeri estate sat on 3 acres along the lakefront, the kind of property that didn't show up on public listings because the people who owned it didn't need to sell anything to anyone. The main house was white stone and black iron, with a circular driveway long enough that the gardeners drove a golf cart between the front gate and the entrance. The service entrance was around the back, through a narrow corridor that opened into a staging kitchen twice the size of Nia's apartment. By 8:30, she was already running behind the gala setup. The event was scheduled for 8 that evening. Dante Valeri was hosting a charity gala, the kind of charity gala with a genuine charitable portion lasted approximately 40 minutes before the real purpose of the evening began, which was powerful people standing close to other powerful people and deciding what the next 6 months of Chicago would look like. Nia had worked 2 of these galas before. She knew the rhythm. She knew where to stand, where not to stand, which guests needed their glass refilled immediately, and which ones would call it an insult if you approached before they gestured. She knew how to move through a room full of people who cost more per square foot than she made in a year, and she knew how to do it without anyone noticing she was there at all. That was the job. She was good at the job. The estate manager, a thin-necked man named Gerald Howell, who wore his authority like it was the only piece of clothing he owned, found her restocking the back bar at 10 and handed her a revised assignment sheet without making eye contact. "You're on champagne service tonight," he said. "Main floor. You stay on the east side of the ballroom. You do not cross in front of the fireplace during speeches. You do not engage guests unless spoken to first." "Same as always," Nia said. "Bianca Serrano will be in attendance." He said the name, the way people say the name, of a Category 5 hurricane, like the warning itself, was supposed to be sufficient. Nia knew who Bianca Serrano was. Everyone on the household staff did. She was Dante Valeri's cousin on his mother's side, 31 years old, unmarried by choice, and possessed of the kind of beauty that she used the way some people use a weapon, not to cause a specific wound, but to remind everyone in proximity that she could. She had never spoken directly to Nia in 2 years. She had, however, twice returned trays of food to the kitchen, with complaints that Nia had personally witnessed being fabricated. "Understood," Nia said. Gerald Howell walked away. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The subtext of every conversation she had ever had with Gerald Howell communicated itself through the precise angle of his chin whenever he spoke to her. She was replaceable. She was here on tolerance. And if she did anything tonight that created the smallest disruption to his carefully managed event, the $47 she had left in her account would need to start doing more work than it was capable of. She went back to restocking the bar. By 6 o'clock, the estate had transformed. Ballroom was something out of a film: candlelight, flowers, tables that cost more to rent for an evening than Nia's bus pass cost in a year. The guest list was 280 confirmed, with another 30 expected through +1 arrangements that Gerald Howell pretended to disapprove of while quietly securing extra place settings. Staff had been briefed, pressed, and positioned. Nia's uniform, the standard estate issue, black with a white collar, was freshly steamed. She'd done it herself that morning before leaving her apartment, which meant she'd had to borrow her neighbor Mrs. Patterson's iron because her own had stopped regulating temperature 6 weeks ago, and everything she'd steamed since had come out slightly wrong on one side. The champagne tray was heavy, 20 glasses, real crystal, the kind that rang like a bell when you tapped the rim. She adjusted her grip, squared her shoulders, and moved through the side corridor into the main ballroom at 7:58, 2 minutes before the first guests were scheduled to arrive. She didn't see Dante Valeri arrive. She rarely did. He moved through his own house the way she'd noticed powerful men often did, without announcing themselves, without requiring the room to adjust, as if their presence was simply a fact of the environment rather than an event. She'd seen him, of course, dozens of times over 2 years. Spoken to him twice, technically, once when he'd asked her to call the kitchen about a coffee order, once when he'd come through the main hall while she was on her knees cleaning the baseboards and said simply, "You missed a spot," before pointing to a section she had not actually missed, then looking slightly closer and saying, "Never mind," and walking away. She had spent approximately 45 seconds replaying that interaction on the bus ride home. That was as much space as she allowed herself to give it. Dante Valeri was her employer, in the most indirect and institutional sense of that word. He was also a man whose name appeared in newspaper archives in ways that no legitimate businessman's name appeared, whose attorneys had a dedicated parking space at the federal courthouse, and whose house she cleaned every morning in exchange for money she needed to keep her son in sneakers and AP classes. That was the full extent of the relationship. That was all it was. The gala started well as these things started. The guests arrived in their coats and their jewelry and their rehearsed smiles, and Nia moved through the east side of the ballroom with her tray and her practiced invisibility, and for the first hour and 40 minutes, The evening was exactly what she had expected it to be. Long, loud, and nothing to do with her. She was crossing the east side of the ballroom at 9:12. She remembered the time because she'd just glanced at the small clock near the serving station to calculate how many hours remained when she heard the laugh. Not a regular laugh, a laugh that was designed to carry. Kind of laugh that communicates, before a single word follows it, that the person producing it has already decided that whoever they're looking at is beneath them. Nia turned and found Bianca Serrano 3 feet away. Bianca was wearing a gown the color of deep red wine, something architectural and Italian. Architectural and that she'd mentioned twice within earshot to make sure people registered its origin. Her hair was dark and elaborate. Her posture was the posture of someone who had never once in her adult life worried that a chair wouldn't be available. She was standing with 2 other women, both expensively dressed, both watching Bianca the way people watch whoever they've decided to let lead. She was looking at Nia, not at the tray, not past her. Directly at her with the specific focus of someone who had just found something interesting to do with the next 5 minutes. "Oh," Bianca said to no one and everyone. "Still here." Nia kept her face neutral. She'd had a lot of practice at that. "Good evening," she said, because it was the response the situation technically required, and she moved to step around Bianca toward the next cluster of guests. Bianca shifted slightly, not dramatically, just enough. Nia stopped. "You know," Bianca said, tilting her head with the performative thoughtfulness of someone setting a trap they'd already decided, was entertaining. "I've always wondered what the agency's standards are for hiring." She looked at one of her companions. "Do they have standards? Weight standards? Presentation standards?" She looked back at Nia. "Because I feel like there might be a conversation worth having." The 2 women with Bianca smiled into their champagne glasses in the way pals must smile when they want to participate in something without being on record as participants. Nia did not say anything. She had learned, a long time ago, that there was a specific kind of person who needed a reaction the way other people needed oxygen. The reaction was the point. The cruelty was just the delivery mechanism. Silence was the only response that cost them something. But Bianca Serrano had not built her reputation on accepting costs quietly. "It's rude to stare at the floor when someone's speaking to you," Bianca said. Her voice had shifted, still light, still carrying that social warmth that made everything she said sound like it was simply candid conversation among friends, but with an edge beneath it that Nia recognized from the way certain surfaces in the estate looked perfectly smooth until you pressed them and found the crack. "Is there a language issue? Should I find someone who—" "No," Nia said. "Quat." She lifted her eyes. "There's no language issue." Something moved through Bianca's expression then. Not embarrassment. More like recalibration. Like a hunter who'd expected prey to run in one direction and found it standing still. "Well," Bianca said. And then she moved to step past Nia, which was when the shoulder of the man adjacent to Bianca, a large, well-fed guest who had been reaching for a passing tray and genuinely was not watching where he was turning, caught the edge of Bianca's arm, and the champagne glass she was holding tipped, and the wine, in the slow-motion way that terrible things sometimes unfold, arched through the air and landed across the lower section of Bianca's gown in a wide, spreading red stain. The man started to apologize immediately. He was already saying he was sorry before the wine had finished falling. But Bianca wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Nia. "You did that." Her voice had changed completely. The social warmth was gone. What was left was cold and certain, the way someone is certain about something they've decided is true regardless of evidence. "I didn't," Nia said. "You bumped into me. I was standing still." She was standing still. This was from a woman 2 feet away, a silver-haired guest in dark green who had clearly watched the entire thing. "The gentleman beside you knocked your arm." Bianca turned toward the silver-haired woman with an expression that could have frozen the lake outside. "And who exactly are you?" The silver-haired woman blinked, and then, in the way that people do when they realize they've stepped into something that has very little to do with facts and everything to do with social hierarchy, she took a half step back and said nothing more. That half step was all Bianca needed. She turned back to Nia. "You ruined a $4,000 gown." Her voice had found a new register now, the one that existed specifically for situations where she wanted an audience. And the audience was assembling. The nearest clusters of guests had gone quiet in that specific way that meant they were listening while pretending they were not. "I want her removed." A man appeared at Bianca's shoulder. Her uncle Rosario, Nia, had been told his name once during a staff briefing. A heavy-set man with small eyes and the practiced authority of someone who had spent decades being the person rich relatives called when a situation needed managing. He looked at Nia the way one looks at a problem rather than a person. "You," he said, "apologize now." "I didn't spill the wine," Nia said. "That's not what she's asking for," Rosario said. "I know," Nia said. "She's asking me to say I did something I didn't do, in front of people who know I didn't do it, because it's easier than the alternative." The room was significantly quieter now. Nia could hear her own heartbeat. She could feel the cold sweat at the back of her neck that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the math happening in her head. $47, $210 deposit. Caleb's sneakers misses. Patterson's iron. The next bus, Hixance, at 11:40, and she could feel herself standing at the precise edge of the line she had drawn for herself 11 years ago, when she had decided that there were certain things she would no longer allow to be taken from her. And one of those things was the simple fact of her own account of reality. "Someone called Gerald," Bianca said. "I want this woman fired tonight." Rosario had his phone out. Bianca's mother, a formidable woman named Carmela, who wore disapproval like a second skin, materialized beside her daughter and was adding something in Italian that Nia did not fully understand, but whose tone required no translation. The two women who had been with Bianca initially had drifted close enough to be part of the scene without taking responsibility for it. 3 or 4 other guests were watching openly now. And then Bianca reached out and took hold of Nia's uniform. Not her arm, not her shoulder. The fabric of her uniform at the collar, in the way a person grabs something they are about to discard. "Know your place," Bianca said, and she pulled. The fabric tore along the seam above Nia's left shoulder and across the upper edge of her collarbone, and the sound of it, that sharp, clean sound of fabric, giving way, cut through the low murmur of the ballroom, the way a dropped glass cuts through a restaurant, sudden and total. 300 people heard it. For exactly 2 seconds, no one breathed. And then the gasp moved through the room like a wave, because beneath the torn fabric, visible now to everyone in that half-circle of horrified and fascinated faces, was a scar. A large, crescent-shaped surgical scar that started near the bottom of Nia's left collarbone and curved downward, the particular silvery pink of skin that has healed over something serious and permanent. Not a small scar. Not the kind that could be written off as incidental. The kind that told a story all on its own to anyone who understood that language. Nia went completely still, not from shame. From something more complicated than shame. The feeling of something private being ripped open in front of people who had not earned the right to see it. People who were already forming opinions about what it meant, who she was. What it said about her body and her history, and the very specific manner in which they were choosing to see her. She heard someone say, quite close to her, "What is that from?" She heard Carmela say something to her daughter in Italian. She heard Bianca say, "Well, that's," and then fall quiet. And then she heard nothing at all, because the ballroom had gone so quiet that the only sound was the fire in the stone fireplace on the far wall and the almost imperceptible creak of someone shifting their weight at the top of the grand staircase. Nia did not look up at the staircase. She didn't need to. She already knew, from the quality of the silence and the particular way 300 people found the same thing to look at, that someone was standing there. She pulled the torn fabric, closed with her hand, and looked straight ahead at a point 6 inches above Bianca Serrano's left ear, and held herself as still as she had ever held herself in her adult life. Because if she moved, even slightly, she was going to do something that Gerald Howell would never forgive, and she had Caleb's deposit to think about, and she did not have the luxury of the things she was currently feeling. Bianca had not turned around yet. She still didn't know what the room was looking at. "Embarrassing," Bianca said, filling the silence with the confidence of some to believe she was still running the conversation. Honestly. Showing up like this, creating a scene. Bianca, the voice came from the staircase. Low even. The voice of a man who did not need to raise his volume to make a room pay attention. And Bianca Serrano, for the first time in that entire evening, went quiet. Because that was the voice of Dante Valeri, and he was descending the staircase. And Nia Bellamy, still holding her torn uniform closed with one hand and her empty champagne tray with the other, did not breathe. She had spent 2 years making sure he never really looked at her. She had been very careful about that. She had been careful and quiet and invisible, and she had kept the number buried so deep that some mornings she forgot it existed. Donor 417. She had been careful. But now Dante Valeri was crossing the ballroom floor, and the 300 people who had watched a woman be humiliated in front of them were watching something else entirely. And Nia could feel with the particular instinct of someone who has spent years reading rooms in order to survive them, that whatever was happening in his face as he looked at her scar was not the expression of a man who saw a housekeeper with a medical history. It was the expression of a man who recognized something. And she knew, with the cold, slow certainty of someone watching the only door they've kept locked for 11 years swing quietly open, that careful was over. Part 2 của kịch bản này được triển khai với dung lượng mục tiêu viết đủ 4,505,000 từ. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của Part 1. Yêu cầu tập trung hoàn toàn vào cấu trúc mâu thuẫn leo thang, các mâu thuẫn nội bộ giữa các nhân vật phải bùng nổ, sự nghi ngờ tăng cao và những sai lầm trong quá khứ bắt đầu để lại hậu quả. Duy trì giọng văn mi thô ráp, giàu cảm xúc, không sao rộng. Hãy kế theo ngồi thử bạc, tập trung vào những phản ứng bản năng nhất của con người, hồi thâu đần đập, những cái nhìn đầy sát khí và sự mệt mỏi rõ ràng. Hội thoại phải chiếm ưu thế, mang tính đối đầu gay gọn, không tri swung. Triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh, scene by scene, tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Kết thúc phần này bằng một nút thắt kịch tính, the point of no return, khiến nhân vật không còn đường lui. Hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết từng hành động nhỏ. Nếu đạt giới hạn phản hồi trước khi đủ dung lượng, hãy dừng lại ở một câu đáng giờ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp. Chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu, nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện phi hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng, nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dừng giữa câu. Hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh, không mở rộng nội dung. Part 2 Dante Valeri did not walk fast. That was the first thing Nia registered the pace of him, unhurried and deliberate, the way a man moves when he has never once in his adult life needed to rush toward anything, because everything in his environment had long since learned to wait. Came down the last 4 steps of the grand staircase and crossed the ballroom floor, and 300 people parted for him, the way water parts. Not because anyone told them to, but because something in the atmosphere shifted the moment he started moving, the way pressure changes before weather arrives. Bianca still hadn't fully turned around. She'd heard her name. She'd heard the voice. But some combination of adrenaline and the particular kind of arrogance that had never once in 31 years been seriously checked kept her facing Nia for one more beat, as if whatever point she'd been making still deserved to be finished. Dante, she said, pivoting now, smoothing her expression into something between confidence and practiced warmth. I'm so glad you're here, because what just happened? I saw what happened. 2 words, both flat. The kind of flat that isn't calm, it's the opposite of calm. It's the thing that sits underneath all the temperature a man refuses to let into his voice, because he's decided that raising his voice in a room full of people would be giving something away he doesn't intend to give. Bianca's smile held, but her eyes recalculated. Then you saw that I said I saw it. He was close now, not close to Bianca. Close to Nia. And Nia, who had spent 2 years in this house, being careful not to be in any room where she had to look at Dante Valeri directly, found herself with no remaining architecture of avoidance, because he had placed himself 4 feet in front of her and was looking at the scar. Not at her face, at the scar. Specifically with a focus so concentrated it had its own weight, at the crescent shape above her collarbone. Nia's hand tightened on the torn fabric. She knew what he was doing. She knew, in the specific and terrible way you know, something you have spent years hoping would never be confirmed, exactly what was happening in his head right now. The recognition, the math, the specific shape of a surgical scar from a procedure, rare enough that a man who'd received it would know it anywhere, on anyone, at any distance. She had counted on the uniform. She had counted on the collar. She had counted on the quiet and the invisibility and the sheer statistical improbability that the man whose bone marrow registry file she'd signed anonymously 11 years ago would ever find her in a ballroom in his own house on a Tuesday night in November. She had been wrong about all of it. What's her name? Dante said. He wasn't asking Nia. He was asking, without looking away from the scar, the general vicinity of his household. Gerald Howell materialized with the speed of a man whose entire career depended on being where his employer needed him. Bellamy, sir. Nia Bellamy. She's been with the estate 2 years. Not him, Dante said. Still not looking away. I'm asking her. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Nia lifted her eyes. She met his. Up close, Dante Valeri looked like 11 years of decisions that had been right often enough to make a man dangerous and wrong, just enough to make him human. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't come from laughing. His jaw was set with the particular tension of someone who had just seen something that rearranged the furniture of everything he thought he knew about his own house. Nia, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was not sure how. Nia Bellamy. How long have you had the scar? It wasn't a question the way questions are usually constructed. It was the kind of sentence that assumes the answer matters. A long time, she said. Something shifted in his face. Perceptible. Barely perceptible. She would have missed it if she hadn't been watching the way you watch something you are terrified of. Dante. Bianca's voice had found a new register. Not cold anymore, not performative, but genuinely unsettled, in a way that suggested she had read something in his posture that she didn't understand and was trying to re-establish the ground beneath her. Whatever you're thinking, I can explain what... You tore her uniform, he said. She ruined my gown. The camera above the east fireplace says otherwise. That landed in the room the way a rock lands in still water, one point of impact, and then rings moving outward in every direction. Bianca's expression went through 3 things in rapid succession: recalculation, and then the particular hardening that comes when someone realizes the facts are against them and decides that facts are not, actually, the point. Dante. Her voice softened. She's a housekeeper. She made a scene at your event, in front of your guests. She made a scene. Yes, she's the one who made a scene. I'm saying that however it started. I watched it start, Bianca. He turned toward her fully now. I watched it from the top of the stairs. I watched you approach her. I watched you block her path when she tried to walk away. I watched you blame her for something 2 people standing 3 feet from you saw clearly. And then I watched you put your hands on her. The room was so quiet that somewhere near the back, someone set down a glass, and the small sound of crystal on linen carried. Bianca's chin went up. It was a reflex, the one she'd had since childhood, the one that meant she was about to recalibrate from defense into attack, because defense was a posture she'd been taught to occupy as briefly as possible. You're defending the help in front of your family, she said. Low even. Her version of his register. In front of your guests. Over a dress. I'm establishing what happened in my house, Dante said. That's different. It looks the same from where I'm standing. Then move. Bianca stared at him. For a moment, just a moment, something genuine moved across her face. Not shame, not remorse. Something closer to the specific confusion of someone who has spent their whole life inside a system that has always worked a particular way and is only now, in real time, watching it fail. Carmela stepped forward. She was a woman who had navigated 64 years of being the matriarch of a family that operated in 2 social registers, simultaneously the public one, which was charitable events and church attendance, and the kind of philanthropic visibility that earned you walls of framed photographs in the lobbies of buildings, with your name on them, and the private one, which was understood rather than discussed. She had the bearing of someone who had never once been uncertain about her rank in any room she entered. Dante, she said. Her voice was the kind of controlled that comes from decades of practice. "This is a family matter." "No," he said, "it's not. She works for you. Bianca is your blood. Blood doesn't cover what I just watched happen." "Dante Marcus." He said the name without raising his voice, without looking away from his aunt. And across the room, near the service corridor entrance, a compact man in a charcoal suit straightened. Marcus Villano had been Dante Valeri's attorney, and the closest thing he had to an advisor for 14 years. He was not a man who startled easily, and he was not startled now, but Nia noticed that when Dante's eyes found him, something passed between them, something quick and purposeful that had nothing to do with the wine or the torn uniform. Sir Marcus had said, "Call St. Vincent, the archive department." The silence this produced was different from the previous silences. Those had been the silences of people watching a confrontation. This was the silence of people who had just heard something they didn't understand and were deciding how worried to be about that. Bianca frowned. "What is St. Vincent?" Dante didn't answer her. Marcus had already stepped back through the service corridor entrance, phone to his ear. Rosario, who had been standing 3 feet to Bianca's left since this began, shifted his weight and said, with the careful voice of a man who has navigated family politics long enough to know when a conversation is about to become expensive, "Dante, whatever the issue is, we can handle it privately. Tonight is not the night. Tonight is exactly the night," Dante said. "Because whatever private handling happened before tonight is what produced this situation." Rosario looked at Gerald Howell. Gerald Howell looked at the middle distance between them and chose emphatically to have no opinion. Nia had not moved. She was still standing in the same position tray, in one hand, torn uniform held closed with the other, and she was aware, with the kind of acute, uncomfortable awareness that comes with being the center of a situation you have no power to redirect, that every person in the half-circle around her was watching her the way people watch a courtroom exhibit, with interest, with assessment, and with the distinct detachment of someone who will return home tonight to their ordinary life, while whatever this is gets resolved. Her shoulder hurt where the seam had given way. Not badly. Just enough to remind her of the physical reality of the last 10 minutes. She thought about Caleb. Specifically, she thought about the expression on his face when she came home on the nights she was too tired to hide how tired she was. The way he'd hand her the granola bar without saying anything. The way he already, at 13, had a version of her face that he watched for information about whether things were okay. She thought about what it would cost him, long to grow up calibrating himself to her stress, and she thought about how she had already decided, years ago, that she was not going to let that happen. That she was going to find a way to make sure he grew up in a house where the thermostat wasn't always set to managed crisis. She had been working on that. She was still working on that. She breathed. "You don't have to stay in this spot," Dante said. She realized with a small jolt that he was talking to her, not to the room. To her directly, in the voice he used she now noticed, having never been close enough before to distinguish registers when he was talking to someone he decided when a specific person was a specific person rather than a general circumstance. "You can sit down. There's a chair at the end of the hall table." "I'm fine," she said. "I know you said that," he said. "I'm saying the option exists." Something about the precision of that, the acknowledgement that she'd said she was fine, and the decision to offer the chair anyway, without arguing the point, made her chest do something complicated that she didn't examine. "Stand," she said. He nodded once and turned back toward the room. Bianca had not gone anywhere. This was, Nia suspected, the most important thing anyone watching needed to understand about Bianca Serrano. She did not retreat. It wasn't stubbornness in the ordinary sense. It was something more structural than that, a deep and practiced inability to accept that a situation was not still winnable, because she had never, in 31 years, been in a situation that wasn't. "You're embarrassing the family," Bianca said to Dante. Quiet enough that the nearest guests had to lean slightly. "That's what you're doing. You're embarrassing us for the benefit of a woman who broke a glass and got defensive about it. And I'm supposed to stand here and..." "Nobody said anything about a glass," Dante said. Bianca stopped. The smallest misstep, The kind that only matters when someone is paying close enough attention. The wine, she corrected smoothly. Almost, I meant the wine. Right, Dante said. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Gerald Howell. Pull the footage from the East camera for the last 2 hours, he said. All of it. Gerald Howell's face went through a very fast and very private sequence of realizations. Sir, the camera is on a... Gerald. Yes, sir. Howell removed himself from the immediate vicinity in the direction of the security station near the kitchen corridor. Bianca's gaze tracked him as he left and then returned to Dante with a new quality. Not fear. She wasn't afraid. But something adjacent to fear, the sensation of a door you believed was open, turning out to be painted on the wall. This is absurd, she said. You're running surveillance on your own family over a domestic disagreement. I run surveillance on my house, Dante said. That's not new information. And what exactly are you expecting to find? I think you know. The silence after that was a different animal entirely. Rosario moved. A small adjustment, barely perceptible, but Nia caught it a slight increase in the distance between himself and Bianca, the physical version of plausible deniability. Carmela looked at her daughter. Something complicated moved through her expression, the specific calculation of a woman deciding which version of loyalty was currently expensive and which was affordable. Bianca registered both of these adjustments. Her jaw tightened. She turned toward Nia. There was nothing warm in the look. There was nothing cold in it either. It was the look of someone identifying the specific point where the thread had pulled loose and tracing it back to the source. I want you to understand something, Bianca said to Nia. Whatever he's doing right now, this isn't protection. This is Dante making a point. You're the point. You're not the person. Nia looked at her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know the difference. Bianca stared at her. Do you? Between being used to make a point and being seen. Nia held the fabric closed against her shoulder. Yeah, I've had a lot of practice with both. Something moved through Bianca's face sharp and quick that Nia couldn't fully classify. Not respect. Not quite. Something that existed in the same neighborhood as respect, but had arrived via a route that neither of them was going to acknowledge in the middle of a ballroom. Then it was gone. Marcus came back through the service corridor entrance. He crossed the room toward Dante with the specific efficiency of a man delivering information that matters. He reached Dante and leaned close, and Nia watched Dante's face during the 7 seconds that Marcus spoke into his ear, and she watched the thing that moved through it, not surprise. Because this was a man who had built an empire partly on the discipline of not visibly registering surprise, but something deeper than surprise. Something that sat in the chest rather than the face. The thing that happens when a piece of information arrives that doesn't add to what you already know, but restructure to what you already know, but structures the entire landscape of what you thought you understood. Marcus stepped back. Dante looked down at something in his hand. A photograph or a printed document. Nia couldn't see it clearly from where she stood. Then he looked up. He looked at Nia, and this time it was different. Every other time he'd looked at her in the last 15 minutes had been the look of a man who suspected something and was gathering evidence. This was the look of a man who had already gathered the evidence and was now on the other side of certainty, standing in a place where the ground had a completely different texture than what he'd been standing on 5 minutes ago. Nia's breath went shallow. She knew. She knew from his face, the way you know sometimes before you know, that whatever Marcus had found in the saint, Vincent Archives had given him a name, and that the name had been hers. Dante crossed the distance between them in 6 steps. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the specific tension around his eyes, the kind that comes from holding something together on the inside that wants very much to come apart. 11 years ago, he said, you were at St. Vincent Medical Center. It was not a question. Nia's hand tightened on the torn fabric until she felt her knuckles ache. She said nothing. Bellamy, he said, N. Bellamy. Age 22, voluntary marrow donor. November. The ballroom around them might as well have ceased to exist. The 300 people, the candlelight, the flowers, Bianca and Carmela and Rosario and Gerald Howell, with his revised assignment sheets. All of it was somewhere on the other side of a very thick piece of glass. I kept the records sealed, Nia said. Her voice came out barely above the volume she'd intended. That was the arrangement. The hospital had a file, Dante said. Not public. My attorney knows the right channels. That was supposed to be anonymous. It was. He paused. Until tonight. She felt the cold move through her. Not the cold of the room. The room was warm. But the cold of something you've protected for 11 years, losing its covering one layer at a time in the space of a single conversation. You need to understand something, she said. She kept her voice steady, with the specific effort of someone holding a door closed from the inside. I didn't take this job because of you. I didn't know it was your house when I applied. The agency placed me, and when I got here and I understood when I recognized. She stopped. Reorganized. I made a decision to stay because I needed the work, and I decided that what I did 11 years ago didn't create any obligation in either direction, and I didn't want. You recognized me, he said. Yes. You've been here 2 years. Yes. And you didn't say anything. No. He was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of someone processing information that has ethical weight. Why? She looked at him. "'Cause saving your life didn't make me entitled to it," she said. And I wasn't interested in being someone's. She caught herself. I wasn't interested in being a symbol of something. I needed a job. I did the job, that's all. Bianca's voice from 6 feet away cut through the quiet. She had heard enough of it to have reassembled the picture, or most of it, and what she had assembled had not improved her posture. "What is this?" she said. "What are you two talking about?" Dante turned toward his cousin. The expression on his face, as he turned, was the one that Nia suspected very few people had ever been on the receiving end of for long. Not rage, not coldness. Something that existed in the particular register between decision and consequence, the expression of a man who has made his mind up completely and is simply narrating the steps. "That woman," he said to Bianca, with a steadiness that made steadiness itself sound like a weapon, whose weight you mocked, whose uniform you tore, who you ordered to apologize in front of every person in this room. He paused. 11 years ago, she nearly died on an operating table giving bone marrow to a recipient she was never allowed to meet. The room went so still that the fire in the fireplace sounded loud. The recipient, Dante said, was me. Bianca's lips parted. Nothing came out. Carmela made a sound that wasn't a word. Rosario looked like a man who has just been handed a bill he didn't know he'd run up. Dante held the document Marcus had given him for 2 more seconds, then placed it carefully in the breast pocket of his jacket. The complications from the procedure cost her most of her savings, he said. She didn't have health insurance that covered the full recovery. She spent the better part of 2 years financially gutted by an act that kept me alive. His voice didn't change volume or temperature. She rebuilt, got married, lost her husband, raised her son alone, and ended up here, cleaning the house of the man she saved, because she needed 40 hours a week and didn't know, and when she found out, said nothing, because she didn't want to be owed anything. The silence stretched. Bianca opened her mouth. "Don't," Dante said. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Bianca closed her mouth. Carmela had the specific expression of a woman who is privately, rapidly, recalculating the last 45 minutes and finding the math catastrophic. Gerald Howell returned from the direction of the security station. He stopped when he read the room. He held a tablet in his hands, and he did not, for the first time in Nia's memory, say anything at all. Dante looked at him. "The footage," Dante said. Gerald crossed to him and turned the tablet so Dante could see it. Whatever was on it, Dante watched for 15 seconds. Then he turned it toward the nearest cluster of guests, slowly, methodically, like a teacher making sure the back row could read the board. Nia had already known what the footage would show. The guests who hadn't been close enough to see clearly earlier could see clearly now. The shoulder of the heavyset man making contact with Bianca's arm. The wine falling. Bianca's eyes moving immediately to Nia. The deliberate, decided placement of blame. One of Bianca's companions from earlier had her hand over her mouth. Rosario turned and spoke to Carmela in low, rapid Italian. Carmela didn't respond. Bianca stood absolutely still in the center of all of it, and her face was doing something that Nia had not expected to see on that particular face, the specific internal collapse of someone whose narrative has publicly failed. Not remorse. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the structural version of it. The moment when the story you've been telling has no more room to hold. I have 34 employees in this house, Dante said to the room. He wasn't performing it. He was just saying it. The way you say facts that have become relevant. Staff. Groundskeeping. Kitchen. Security. I am telling you all of you that the standard I am establishing tonight, publicly, in front of every person here is this: no one inside this house, or connected to this house, or benefiting from anything this house provides, will treat the people who work here as though they exist outside the boundaries of basic human decency. His jaw tightened. That standard should not have needed to be said. The fact that it does is a failure I own. He turned back toward Bianca. You're done here, he said. Bianca's chin came up reflexively. You don't the residence in Lincoln Park, the membership at Garrett, the car lease, the account at Marchetti's, the standing reservation at Club 11. He held her gaze. All of it runs through the estate. All of it stops tonight. Bianca stared at him. For a very long moment she was absolutely still. Then her face did something Nia had not expected. It cracked. Just slightly, just across the eyes. Not tears, not quite, but the precursor to them, the thing that lives one layer beneath the performance of composure in a person who has 31 years building a life on access to someone else's power and has just, in real time, in front of 300 witnesses, watched the foundation of that access disappear. You can't be serious, she said. Bianca, over a housekeeper. It came out stripped of its earlier architecture. Raw and genuinely confused. You're burning our family over a housekeeper. Who kept me alive, Dante said. Ballroom held that sentence the way a room holds a sound after the source of it has stopped resonant, occupying space, refusing to settle. Bianca looked at Nia. It was a long look. The kind that has no performance in it, because there's no remaining energy to perform. Just the stripped reality of a woman looking at another woman and finding, for the first time, something she hadn't been willing to find before: the actual shape of the person standing there. Not a uniform, not a body to mock, not a moving piece in her evening's entertainment. Person. Nia looked back at her. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that the last 40 minutes hadn't already said better. Carmela moved to her daughter's side. She placed one hand on Bianca's arm, and the gesture was not comfort so much as it was navigation, the touch of a woman steering another woman toward an exit before the cost of remaining grew higher. Bianca let herself be steered, but at the last moment, at the edge of the crowd's parting, she stopped. She looked back at Dante. You think this makes you the good person in the room, she said. Quiet, precise, the final move of someone who cannot win, but refuses to leave the board without one last piece placed. You've spent 11 years building something that the rest of us have learned to live inside. The things you do, the way you operate, you're not a good person, Dante. You're just a powerful one who found a convenient reason to be kind tonight. Dante held her gaze. You're not wrong, he said. That appeared to be the one answer she hadn't prepared for. She left. Carmela followed. Rosario looked at Dante for a long moment, and what moved through his face was something older than this evening. The weight of a family that had been navigating its own contradictions for decades. The specific grief of a man who loved his institution more than any of the individuals inside it, and was just now watching the institution redefine itself in real time. He left without speaking. Dante stood in the center of the ballroom with 300 people who had forgotten, at some point in the last 20 minutes, that they were guests at a charity gala, that they were come instead witnesses to something. They were going to come up at dinner tables for the next several years. He looked at Nia. She was still holding the torn fabric closed. He reached up and removed his suit jacket. The motion was quiet and deliberate, and he crossed to where she stood and placed it around her shoulders without asking permission, which was the kind of gesture that could have felt presumptuous, but didn't. Because of the specific care with which it was done, the way he positioned it, so the weight of it fell on her uninjured shoulder, the way he stepped back immediately after, giving her room. Nia looked down at the jacket. It was warm. It smelled like cedar, and something else she didn't try to identify. She looked up at him. "That's not necessary," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm doing it anyway." She didn't argue. She was too tired to argue, and the jacket was warm, and the evening had been extremely long. And somewhere in this city, Kilpwa, at home, doing his homework and probably eating cereal for dinner because she had not been there to make sure he had something with protein in it. And she was holding herself together with the particular adhesive of a woman who has been holding herself together for a very long time and is starting to feel the places where the seams are thin. Dante turned toward the room. "The gala continues," he said. Simple, final. The voice of a man who owns the room in the most complete sense of that phrase. The bar is open. The kitchen is ready. The charitable portion of the evening. A slight pause, so controlled it might have been imperceptible to anyone who wasn't watching for it. "Which is the reason all of you are here," will proceed on schedule. The room began, carefully and gradually, to breathe again. People turned back to each other. Conversations resumed with the slightly artificial energy of people who were processing something while performing normalcy. Glasses were refilled. The orchestra, which had stopped somewhere in the middle of all of it, without Nia noticing, started again. Gerald Howell materialized at Dante's shoulder. "Sir," he said. "The East Side staff rolled," Dante said. "I need you to do something for me." "Of course. I need you to tell me, accurately and completely, how many complaints from household employees have been filed in the last 2 years and not formally addressed." Gerald Howell went the color of old paper. I stopped. I handled things on a case-by-case. "How many?" Gerald's mouth opened and closed once. 11, he said. Quiet. The word falling out of him the way a confession falls not chosen. Just inevitable. Dante looked at him for a long time. "By morning," he said, "I want names, circumstances, and outcomes." All 11. Gerald Howell nodded with the movement of a man carrying something very heavy in a very small container. Dante dismissed him with a slight tilt of his head, and Gerald retreated with the speed and trajectory of someone who needed to go sit somewhere private and do some serious thinking. Nia had been watching all of this from inside the jacket, which was absurd. She understood that it was absurd. Wearing her employer's suit jacket in the middle of his ballroom while the orchestra played and the guests pretended they hadn't just watched 11 years of a secret get excavated in front of them. Dante turned back to her. "You need to sit down," he said. "I'm still fine. You've said that 3 times. It's still true." He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has decided to choose his battles. Then at least, he said, "Let me get you something to eat." "You haven't—" He stopped. A flicker of something self-conscious moved through his face, so brief she almost missed it. "The kitchen has been going since 4 this afternoon." "There's food, I know," she said. "I helped set it up." He blinked. Then, unexpectedly, in the middle of all of it, the torn uniform and the scar and Bianca's red gown, and 11 years of anonymity lying in pieces on a marble ballroom floor, something moved through his expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, the preliminary shape of a smile. "Right," he said. "I know where the kitchen is," Nia said. "I know you know," he said. They stood there for a moment in the middle of the recalibrating ballroom, the housekeeper in the Mafia Boss's jacket and the Mafia Boss without one, and the absurdity of the whole situation pressed against the backs of Nia's eyes, in a way she wasn't going to let become tears, because she had been holding that line for 11 years, and tonight was not the night it broke. Then Marcus appeared at Dante's shoulder again. He leaned close. And whatever he said this time, in the 7 seconds he spoke, was not the same quality of information as before. Nia watched Dante's face during those 7 seconds the way she'd watched it during the first 7, and the difference was immediate and unmistakable. The first time had been the restructuring of a landscape, the arrival of something that changed the meaning of what he'd already known. This time was different. This time, when Dante looked up from whatever Marcus had told him, his face had the specific compression of a man who has just been handed a problem that is not emotional and not historical, but immediate and operational. Kind of problem that requires the part of him that had built the empire to engage ways that the rest of this evening had not required. He looked at Marcus. "When?" he said. Within the hour, Marcus said. Dante looked at Nia. The expression on his face, in this new configuration, was harder to read because it had more layers in it now. And the layers were doing different things. And somewhere in the middle of all of them was something she recognized as the specific weight of a man who has just understood that tonight is not over. That the thing that happened in the ballroom was not the most significant thing that happened tonight, and that whatever Marcus had just told him was about to change the shape of everything that came next. I need you to go with Marcus, Dante said. Nia frowned. What? There's a situation, he said. I need you somewhere secure while I handle it. I don't understand what. There are people, he said, who have known for approximately 30 minutes that you exist, and who you are to me. And some of those people are going to find that information useful in ways that are not good for you. Nia stared at him. Cold that moved through her this time was a different species entirely from the one she'd felt when the scar was exposed, when her name had been said in front of the room, when 11 years of anonymity had come apart at the seam. This was the cold of understanding that the exposure wasn't just social. My son, she said. Dante was already moving. Marcus, he said. On it, Marcus said, phone already out. Caleb, Nia said. Her voice came out wrong, stripped of the steadiness she'd held for the last 40 minutes, stripped of everything except the single word that mattered. He's at home. He's alone.
We have people going there right now,
Dante said. He turned back toward her, and his voice dropped to a register that was meant only for her, the specific register of a man who is trying to deliver information as clearly and calmly as possible to someone who needs it to land without panic. He is safe. He will stay safe. I need you to trust me for the next 30 minutes. I don't know you, she said. You've known me for 2 years. I've cleaned your house for 2 years, I know, he said. That's what I'm saying. I know that's not the same thing. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Trust me, for 30 minutes, he said. And then I will answer every question you have, for as long as you want to ask them. Nia looked at him. She looked at Marcus, who had the face of a man who did not make promises his employer couldn't keep. She looked at the jacket around her shoulders, warm, cedar-scented, completely absurd. She thought about Caleb eating cereal alone in their apartment. She thought about 11 years of carefully managed invisibility, the number buried so deep. She sometimes went weeks without thinking about it, the donor file sealed, the job taken without knowing, the recognition kept silent, the decision made and remade every morning for 2 years on the 51-minute bus ride to the North Shore. All of it, every careful, deliberate, exhausting inch of it, had collapsed in one evening. And now, in the wreckage of all that careful work, the man she had spent 2 years not being seen by was looking at her as if she was, for the first time, fully visible. And somewhere across the city, her son was alone. And the evening, which had already contained more than any one evening was reasonably supposed to hold, had just become something. She went with Marcus. Not because she trusted him. Not because she trusted Dante. She went because the alternative was standing in the middle of a ballroom, wearing a dead man's suit jacket, not dead, she corrected herself, very much alive. Currently crossing the room toward a cluster of men who had the specific posture of people being given urgent instructions and waiting for something to happen to her that she had no information about, and therefore no way to prepare for. Nia Bellamy had spent 11 years preparing for things. She was not good at standing still while something moved toward her. Marcus led her through the service corridor, past the staging kitchen, where 3 catering staff were pretending very have opinions about the fact that their colleague was walking through in the estate owner's jacket, and into a narrow hallway that turned twice before opening into a room she had never been in. It was a study. Not the main one. She'd cleaned the main study on the 2nd floor. She knew every surface of it. This was smaller, off the east wing, lined with shelving that held actual books rather than decorative ones, a difference she'd learned to identify quickly. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the side garden where the lights were still on from the gala setup. Marcus closed the door. Sit, he said. You're the 2nd person tonight who's told me to sit, she said. Did it work the other time? No. Then stand, he said, and moved to the desk where a laptop was already open. Nia stayed near the door. Not because she intended to leave, she'd made her choice in the ballroom, and she was living with it for the next 30 minutes, but because the room felt safer with an exit at her back, and she had learned, young, that the feeling of safety and actual safety were different things. But the feeling was still worth something. "What's the situation?" she said. Marcus was typing. "Mr. Valeri will explain." "Mr. Valeri told me to come with you." "You're here. Explain." Marcus stopped typing. He looked at her over the top of the laptop with the expression of a man reassessing a calculation. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Honestly?" "Someone more—" He paused, clearly selecting the word. "Deferential. I cleaned his bathrooms," Nia said. "I wasn't in his custody." Something moved through Marcus's face that might have been the compressed version of a smile in a man who didn't produce them frequently. "There's been a complication," he said. "I understood that much." The conversation in the ballroom was visible, obviously, and the estate has a guest list that includes people whose interests are not always aligned with Mr. Valeri's. When information moves through a room that size, it moves fast, and it moves in multiple directions simultaneously. Nia looked at him. Someone in the ballroom made a call. Within 12 minutes of your name being said out loud. Marcus turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a security feed exterior, the front gate of the estate. Car was idling on the street beyond the gate. "We don't know yet who placed the call, or to whom. We know the car has been there for 9 minutes and is registered to a shell company with no traceable principal." Nia looked at the car on the screen. Black, ordinary make, ordinary model, the kind of car that was designed to be unmemorable. "And my son," she said. "2 of our people reached the building 11 minutes ago. He's fine. He argued with them about finishing his homework before agreeing to come." Something released in Nia's chest that had been compressing since the moment Dante said the word secure. "That sounds right," she said. "They're bringing him here." "Here," she repeated. "It's the safest location available tonight." Marcus said it the way a man says something that is factually true, but that he understands creates its own complications. I recognize that's not a simple thing to hear. It wasn't. Nia pressed the heel of her hand briefly against her sternum, a gesture she'd had since her 20s, something her body did when it needed to physically locate itself, and breathed. "The people in that car," she said. "What do they want?" "That depends on who sent them," Marcus said, "which is what Mr. Valeri is currently determining. Give me the range." Marcus studied her for a moment. "The range," he said, "is that they're here to observe and report. On one end. The other end is that someone has decided that the information revealed tonight about your relationship to Dante changes your value as a pressure point." Nia understood what pressure point meant in the context of a man like Dante Valeri. She understood it the way you understand something you've always known was possible but have spent 11 years refusing to think about. Because thinking about it would have meant acknowledging that the choice she made at 22 on an operating table in a hospital room had permanently attached her to something she could not see the full shape of. She had known his name. Not at the time the donor program had kept both parties anonymous, and she had kept her side of that agreement faithfully. But 2 years ago, on the 51-minute bus ride to the North Shore, when the agency had given her the address, and she had looked it up and found the name attached to the estate, she had known. Dante Valeri. She had sat with that knowledge for 47 minutes of the bus ride, watching the city move past the window, and she had made a decision that she'd remade every morning since. She was not going to make it mean anything. Procedure was done. It was history. She needed the job. Took the job. The connection was coincidental and private, and it was going to stay that way. For 2 years it had stayed that way. Now a car was sitting outside the gate, and her son was being driven here in the middle of the night by men she didn't know. And the number she'd buried was exposed. The door opened. Dante came in and closed it behind him. He'd found another jacket somewhere, darker, slightly less formal. The jacket of a man who'd stepped out of the event and back into the version of himself that the event had been temporarily covering. He looked at Marcus first, then at Nia, and his face did the specific thing it had been doing all evening, reading her with a focus that she suspected he applied to everything, but that felt, when directed at her, like being held up to a light. Caleb's 20 minutes out, he said to her directly. Marcus told me. Are you all right? I'm not going to keep answering that question, she said. Fair, he said. He moved to the desk and looked at the laptop screen. Car's still there. Who is it? Marcus said. Dante was quiet for 3 seconds, Portelli. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. 1 second, then opened them and returned to professional neutral. You're sure? The plate traces to the Portelli shell in Skokie. The one they rotate. Dante looked at Nia. You need to understand something about tonight's guest list. Tell me, there are 2 families in Chicago who have spent the last 4 years waiting for a specific kind of leverage against me. Not legal leverage. Not the federal kind, I handle that separately. Personal leverage. The kind that changes the math of a negotiation before the negotiation starts. He paused. 2 hours ago, in front of 300 people, I publicly identified the most significant personal debt I carry, and the specific nature of it. Nia looked at him. I'm the leverage, she said. You could be, he said. If someone decided to use you that way, and the Portelli family would. Yes. She absorbed this with the stillness of someone who has absorbed a number of difficult things in one evening and has found a temporary floor beneath all of them. Then what do we do? She said. Dante looked at her for a moment. I'm in this room, she said. My son is being driven here. Whatever this is, I'm already in it. So what do we do? Something moved through Dante's face quick, specific that she filed away for later examination. We find out what Portelli knows, he said, and what he wants, before he decides what to do with what he knows. He turned to Marcus. Get Rinaldi on the phone. Marcus stepped out. The room felt different without him, smaller, or maybe more honest, the way rooms sometimes do when the number of people in them drops to the number required for a real conversation. Dante sat on the edge of the desk, not behind it. On the edge of it, which was a different posture than behind it. And Nia noticed the difference the way she'd noticed all of it. The jacket on her shoulders, the chair offered in the ballroom, the careful way he'd stepped back after placing it. Ask me what you want to ask, he said. I have about 20 questions. Pick one. She looked at him. Did you search for me? He didn't hesitate. Yes. For how long? About 3 years. After the 2 I spent recovering. He looked at the window. The hospital wouldn't release your name. The program's confidentiality was complete. I hired 2 separate investigators. Neither of them found you. I moved, she said, after the recovery. Different city for a while. Different name professionally. She stopped herself. Different name professionally, he repeated. I went back to my maiden name after I married, she said. Then back to my married name after he died. The agencies I worked through used whatever was current. She paused. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't to hide from you specifically. I understand that now, he said. Did you believe it when I told you in the ballroom? He was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, not evasive. I believe the part about not wanting to be owed, he said. That rang true. The part about not knowing it was my house. He tilted his head slightly. I'm still sitting with that. I know how it sounds. It sounds unlikely. It was unlikely, she said. It was also true. He held her gaze. She held his. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has decided to operate on a version of the truth until the evidence changes. Caleb's father, he said. What happened? It was abrupt. She registered that, but she also registered that the question wasn't prurient. It had the specific directness of someone building a picture they needed to be accurate. Construction accident, she said, 5 years ago. It wasn't the industry you're thinking. He was a site manager for a civil firm, a crane equipment failure. She said it, the way she'd learned to say it, with the flatness of a fact that has been repeated enough times to have lost its sharpest edges on the outside, while the inside was something she didn't examine in rooms like this. Caleb was 8. Dante said nothing for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. I know you mean that, she said. You don't have to say it again. A noise from outside somewhere in the main house. The orchestra had shifted to something slower, the gala continuing on its schedule with the specific resilience of expensive events that have been paid for in full. The door opened. Marcus came back in, but he wasn't alone. The man behind him was someone Nia had never seen. 50s, compact, with the gray stubbled face of someone who hadn't slept recently, and the eyes of someone for whom that was a normal state of affairs. He was dressed practically not event clothing, street clothing, and he moved into the room with the ease of someone who'd been in this room before. "Rinaldi," Dante said. "The car's gone," Rinaldi said immediately without preamble. "Left 2 minutes ago heading south." Voluntarily, Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. Can't say yet." Rinaldi looked at Nia with the flat assessment of a man cataloging information. "This her?" "Yes," Dante said. "The kid's here. They're in the kitchen." Nia was already moving toward the door. "Third door on your left," Rinaldi said. She went. The kitchen was warm and smelled like the end of a catering service, the specific smell of food that has been elaborately prepared and largely consumed, the bottom of the stock's pot, and the remnants of something that had been extraordinary 4 hours ago and was now just evidence. Caleb was sitting on a stool at the prep counter with a plate of food in front of him that someone clearly assembled from gala leftovers, eating with the focused attention of a 13-year-old boy who has been told very little about why he's in a stranger's kitchen at 10:15 on a school night and has decided that protein comes first. He looked up when Nia came through the door. His face went through several things very quickly: relief, assessment, the particular 13-year-old version of trying not to show either, and then he looked at the jacket she was wearing, which was not her jacket, and at the torn collar visible beneath it, and his face went to something else entirely. "Mom, I'm okay," she said. She crossed to him and pulled him against her, and he let her, which he didn't always anymore, which meant he was more scared than he was letting on. He was taller than she remembered from this morning. That kept happening. She held on for a moment longer than was necessary, and then let go. And he straightened up and looked at her with the specific expression he'd been making since he was 6, the one that meant he was deciding whether to ask the direct question or start with something easier. He went direct. "What happened to your shirt?" "Someone tore it." "Who?" "Someone who made a bad decision." Caleb looked at her. He looked at the kitchen around them. He looked at the 2 men who were standing near the back entrance with the posture of people who were there professionally. "Where are we?" he said. "A house I work at. Why are we here at night?" "Because there was a situation, and it was the safest place." "Safest from what?" Nia looked at her son, 13 years old, doing algebra in his head and looking at her with the eyes of someone who had inherited enough of her self-possession to know when he was being managed. "I'll tell you everything," she said. "Tomorrow. Tonight I need you to eat and stay close to me." Caleb looked at the plate in front of him, then back at her. "The food's actually really good," he said. "Good. Like, really good." "Okay, Caleb. I'm just saying whoever cooked this." "Eat the food," she said. He ate the food. Nia stood next to him and put her hand on his back, between his shoulder blades, where she'd put her hand since he was an infant when he needed to sleep and couldn't, and she breathed and she tried to think. Problem with trying to think was that the information she had was incomplete, and incomplete information was a specific type of torture for a woman who had built her survival system on preparation. She knew someone at the gala had contacted the Portelli family within 12 minutes of her name being said. She knew that car outside the gate had not been there by accident. She knew Dante believed her existence, now public, made her useful to people who wanted leverage against him. What she didn't know, what exactly that leverage would look like, what it would require, what the cost would be, and who would be asked to pay it. What she didn't know, what Dante intended to do about it, and what his intentions would require of her. What she didn't know, whether the 11 years of careful distance she'd maintained had done anything at all to protect her and her son from exactly this situation, or whether the distance had been an illusion, and the connection had always been there, waiting for a night with bad lighting, and a woman in a red gown, and a glass of wine falling in the wrong direction. She was still standing there with her hand on Caleb's back when Rinaldi appeared at the kitchen doorway. "He wants you back in the study," he said. Caleb looked up. "Go," he said to Nia. 13 years old, granola bar morning, sneakers from 2 sizes ago. "I'll be fine." "I know you will," she said. "Don't let them push you around," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not going to let them push me around," she said. "The jacket's too big," he said, looking at it. I know. Just saying. She went back to the study. Dante was on the phone when she came in, standing at the window with his back to the room, speaking in Italian too fast and too low for her to track more than fragments. Marcus was at the desk. Rinaldi was near the door, with the posture of a man who has repositioned himself strategically without making it obvious. The phone call ended. Dante turned. His face had changed again. Not dramatically, this was a man who had been trained, by experience, if not formally, to give very little away in his face. But she had spent the last 2 hours reading him with the specific attention of someone whose situation depended on accurate information, and she could see it. The tightening around the jaw, the particular quality of stillness that wasn't calm, but was the compressed version of something that wasn't. What? She said. Portelli didn't send the car, he said. Marcus looked up from the desk. Nia looked at Dante. Then who? She said. Carmela, he said. The name landed in the room and sat there. Nia ran it through what she knew. Carmela, Bianca's mother. Dante's aunt. The woman who had stood beside her daughter in the ballroom, who had spoken in rapid Italian, who had steered Bianca toward the exit with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been managing damage for decades. Your aunt, Nia said. My father's sister, Dante said. Yes. She contacted someone. She contacted Frank Portelli. Who is... He stopped. Reorganized. Frank Portelli is a man my family has had a complicated relationship with for 15 years. He's not an enemy in the conventional sense. He's someone who exists in a parallel position. Who benefits when I'm operating from a disadvantage and loses when I'm not? And Carmela called him. From the car, on the way out of the estate. Marcus traced it 20 minutes ago. He paused. Which means she made the decision before she was fully out of the driveway. Which means she'd been thinking about it before she left. Nia absorbed this. She was already calculating, she said. In the ballroom, while it was still happening. Yes. While she was standing next to her daughter, watching you take everything away from her. Yes. Nia looked at the window. Outside, the garden lights were still on. Somewhere beyond the wall, the gala was still going. She could faintly hear it, the low, persistent sound of a gathering that had been paid for through the following hour. What did she tell him? Nia said. Dante said nothing for a moment. Dante. Her voice came out with an edge she hadn't fully intended. What did she tell Portelli? She told him about you, he said. Your name, your history, your son. He held her gaze. And she told him about the account. What account? He was quiet for 3 seconds. 11 years ago, he said, when the hospital program refused to let me contact the donor, I established a private fund. Through a legal trust. The intention was, if I ever found you, there would be resources available. For whatever you needed. Nia stared at him. You kept money for me. It wasn't, he paused. I didn't think of it as keeping money for you. I thought of it, pause. He was choosing words with the careful precision of a man who doesn't like choosing words carefully. A debt that I intended to repay if I ever got the chance. How much, she said. He told her. She sat down, not deliberately. Her legs made the decision, and she processed it afterward, finding herself in the chair near the bookshelf with her hands in her lap and the number rearranging everything in her understanding of the last 2 years. That's been sitting in a trust, she said. With my attorney as executor, he said. For 11 years, yes. And Carmela knows about it. Marcus believes she's known for at least 4 years. There was a period when my father was ill, and the estate's financial instruments were reviewed by family trustees. The trust would have appeared in that review. He moved away from the window toward the chair, across from her. Not behind the desk. Across from her. I didn't know she knew. I should have. What does Portelli do with that information? Nia said. He uses it, Dante said, to create a picture. A picture where I am, where there is a personal and financial connection between us that can be characterized as something other than what it is, and where that characterization becomes useful. He paused. To people who want to destabilize my position, by making it look like you're keeping a woman. She said it plain because there was no version of this conversation where saying it plainly wasn't better than dancing around it. Dante held her gaze. Yes, and because I work in your house, and because you just publicly defended me in front of 300 witnesses, and because there's a trust with my name attached to it. Picture assembles easily, he said. Yes, even if none of it is true. The truth, Dante said, with the specific flatness of a man who has operated in environments where this lesson was learned early, is less portable than the picture. Nia sat with that. She sat with it, and she looked at the bookshelf across from her real books. She'd been right about that. An actual spine-cracked, well-read shelf of books that had been opened and used, and she thought about Caleb in the kitchen, eating gala leftovers, and about the deposit she didn't have, and about the $47, and about 11 years of a number she'd buried. And she thought about her husband Marcus, not this Marcus, her Durant, who had been a man who believed that doing the right thing was its own protection, and who had died in a construction accident at 31 that had nothing to do with morality or doing the right thing, just a crane failure and the specific cruelty of random physics. Durant had believed in the protection of right action. Nia had loved him for it. She had also, since his death, operated on the knowledge that the world did not actually run on that system. There's something you're not telling me, she said. Dante looked at her. Marcus, she said. The first thing he told you was about Portelli's car. The second thing was something else. Your face was different the second time. Rinaldi made a very small sound near the door that might have been involuntary. Dante was quiet for a moment that was 4 seconds too long to be neutral. There was a secondary communication, he said, from Portelli's office to my operations manager, arrived in the last 30 minutes. What did it say? It was a message, Dante said about Caleb. The room narrowed. Nia's vision didn't change, her breathing didn't change. But something in her central nervous system fired in a way that was below language and below decision-making, the specific biological response of a parent who has been handed a threat to their child. Clarify, she said. Her voice was flat and cold in a way she didn't recognize as her own. Not a direct threat, Dante said quickly. A signal. The kind that says, we know the child exists. We know where he goes to school. We know his schedule. He held her gaze steadily. It's leverage language. It's meant to communicate that they have information. Not that they intend to use it tonight, but they could, she said. It's meant to say they could, he said. Yes. And what's the condition, she said. For them not to. Dante said nothing. There's a condition, she said. That's how this works. What do they want? Dante looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the desk. They want me to step back, Dante said. From a specific negotiation that's been ongoing for 8 months. Contract that would consolidate control of 3 distribution routes on the south side. If I withdraw, Portelli steps in. It's worth a significant amount to him. And if you don't withdraw, Nia said, then the picture gets assembled and distributed, Dante said. Story about you and me, the trust, the employment, the ballroom. His jaw tightened. And then they find other ways to make the point. About Caleb, Nia said. That's the implication, she said. Nia sat still. She sat completely deliberately still. Because the alternative to stillness was something she didn't have room for in this room with these men and this situation that had grown from a torn uniform and a champagne glass into something with teeth in the space of 3 hours. She looked at Dante. Can you protect him, she said. Actually, not tonight specifically, I understand. Tonight you have the people and the structure. I mean as a sustained thing. If this doesn't resolve quickly, can you actually protect my son? Dante met her eyes. Yes, he said. Don't tell me yes, because I want to hear it, she said. Tell me yes, because it's true. I know the difference, he said. Yes, it's true. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Rinaldi near the door, who had the face of a man who was not used to being in rooms where this particular type of conversation happened, not the operational part. He was clearly experienced with that, but the human part, the part where a woman sat in a chair and made decisions about her child's safety in real time. Okay, she said. Okay, Dante repeated. What do you need from me, she said. Dante was quiet for a moment that was different from the previous quiet moments, thoughtful rather than withheld. I need you to stay here tonight, he said. Both of you. Tomorrow we establish a more permanent arrangement for the near term. Paused. I need you to be willing to let people know that the situation between us is not what Portelli intends to describe it as, which means being visible, publicly, in a way that puts me further into this, she said. Yes, he said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Nia looked at her hands. She thought about the bus ride. The service entrance. The steamed uniform with the iron she'd borrowed. Gerald Howell and his revised assignment sheets, and the 11 complaints he'd buried. The AP program deposit. The granola bars. She thought about the choice she'd made at 22 on an operating table, not a dramatic choice, not a heroic one. She'd needed money for tuition, and the marrow donor program paid a small compensation, and they'd told her the compatibility was rare, and she'd made a practical decision to have complications they hadn't fully prepared her for, and she'd handled those complications the way she'd handled every complication since, alone, quietly, one day at a time. She thought about what it would mean to stop handling things alone. And she thought about the specific danger of that, not the tactical danger. Not Portelli and his pictures and his leverage language, but the interior danger. The danger of letting 11 years of distance close in the space of one evening because a gown got stained and a uniform got torn and a scar got seen. I need to ask you something, she said to Dante. Ask it. Why did you put the trust in my name, she said. Why not a general charity? Why not something anonymous that you donated to? Why a trust with my name? Dante was quiet. Because it was yours, he said finally. The debt was to you specifically, not to a concept, not to a category. He held her gaze. You were a specific person who did a specific thing. Anonymizing it would have been, he paused, easier. But inaccurate. Nia looked at him. She thought about accuracy, about what it meant to be seen accurately, specifically, as a particular person, rather than a general circumstance, about how rarely that happened, about how much of her adult life had been spent being seen as a category, a housekeeper, a widow, a plus-size black woman in a uniform with a heavy champagne tray, and how the man sitting across from her in this small room off the East Wing had, in the space of one evening, managed to see her more accurately than most people had in years. She wasn't sure what to do with that. She was almost sure it was dangerous. She was entirely sure that Caleb was in the kitchen and that there was a message about his school schedule sitting in Dante Valeri's operations manager's inbox, and that the $47 and the AP deposit and the bus ride home had become, in the course of one ballroom confrontation, completely irrelevant to the actual shape of her situation. And she was sure, in the cold, clear, practical way, that she'd been sure about difficult things her whole adult life, that she was going to have to make a decision tonight that would change the structure of everything that came after it. She was still sitting with that certainty, turning it over, looking at its edges, when the door opened without a knock and Rinaldi stepped in from the hallway with a look on his face that was the specific look of a man delivering information he wishes he wasn't delivering. There's a second message, he said to Dante. Dante looked at him. Portelli's people, Rinaldi said. They picked up the estate manager. The room went absolutely still. Gerald Howell, Marcus said. 20 minutes ago, voluntary, he went with them. Which means he called them, Dante said. His voice had dropped to something Nia had not heard from him before, not anger. Something below anger, something that had age in it. The specific register of a man who has been betrayed by someone in his own house and is processing the shape of it in real time. Gerald called Portelli. Before the gala ended, Rinaldi said. Nia looked at Dante. She understood now what Rinaldi's face had been doing, because Gerald Howell had been inside this house for 7 years. Gerald Howell had the service schedules, the employee records, the security rotation, the archive of 11 buried complaints. Gerald Howell knew which cameras covered which corridors, and which ones had the 12-sec gaps in their rotation, and which doors had the older locks that the upgraded system hadn't reached yet. Gerald Howell knew everything about this house. And Gerald Howell had been on Portelli's phone within 20 minutes of the ballroom confrontation, which meant the 11 complaints he'd buried hadn't been buried out of laziness or institutional inertia, which meant every person on the household staff who had been too afraid to push back, every complaint that had disappeared, every worker who'd been made to feel expendable and replaceable and invisible that had been managed actively by a man who had been cultivating access to the inside of Dante Valeri's house for an unknown length of time, waiting for an unknown moment. And the moment had been tonight. Nia felt the cold move through her differently this time, not the cold of exposure, not the cold of threat, but the cold of understanding that the thing she'd walked into 2 years ago when she took this job had been larger and older, and more specifically constructed than anything she'd had the information to see. She looked at Dante. He was looking at her, and in his eyes, beneath all the controlled professional structure of a man who had spent 15 years being unreadable, she saw the specific expression of a man who has just understood that the person in front of him has been inside a situation he didn't know existed, and that she has been inside it specifically because of him, and that the cost of that has been invisible and accumulating for 2 years and is only now becoming countable. Nia, he said. It was the first time he'd used her name without the last name attached. She registered that. The 11 complaints, she said. Staff members who were afraid to push back. Her voice was steady, in the way things are steady when they have found their floor. Gerald buried them because Portelli needed this house to stay exactly as it was. Because disruption would have triggered your attention. Because if the workers felt safe enough to escalate, you would have looked more closely, and if you'd looked more closely, you might have found. Gerald, Dante said. Quiet, how long, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't know yet, he said. But long enough, she said. Yes, he said. Long enough. Nia sat in the chair in the East Wing study with the too large jacket around her shoulders, and the number the trust contained rearranging itself in her understanding, and the sound of the gala fading somewhere in the main house, and Caleb eating. Leftovers in the kitchen, 11 years of carefully constructed distance from this man and this house and this specific, complicated, thoroughly situation. All of it coming down to the same question she'd been carrying since she was 22 years old on an operating table, making a practical decision that turned out not to be simple at all. What happens now? And the answer, the only honest answer, the one she'd been encircling, since the moment the fabric tore, and the scar was seen, and the scar Doanson staircase, and Dante Valeri descended a staircase, was that she no longer had the option of not knowing the answer to that question, because the question had found her first. She took a breath. She took off the jacket and folded it over the arm of the chair, and she stood up, and she looked at Dante Valeri directly with the full, unguarded look of a woman who has decided that the version of herself, who spent 2 years being invisible in this house, is no longer the version of herself. She stood up, not dramatically, not with a speech prepared. She stood up the way a person stands up when they have finished sitting and have to decide what comes next. And she looked at Dante Valeri with the full, uncovered look of a woman who has run out of the specific energy required to be anything other than exactly what she is. Tell me what you need, she said. Dante looked at her for 1 second. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. Tell me what you need. Something moved through his face. He let it pass without trying to manage it. I need to find Gerald before Portelli finishes debriefing him, he said. Whatever Gerald gives them tonight shapes everything that comes next. Staff records, the security architecture, the trust documents if Portelli has all of it by morning. We're responding to a picture that's already been painted. How long do you have? Nia said. Rinaldi answered. Gerald's been with them 40 minutes. Portelli's people work fast, but they also like to feel thorough. My estimate, 2 hours before they have what they need, and Gerald becomes a liability they don't want to maintain. The way he said liability landed without softness. You're saying they'll hurt him, Nia said. I'm saying Gerald made a choice tonight, Rinaldi said. And the people he made it with don't offer severance. Nia looked at him, then at Dante. And you're going after him. My people are already moving, Dante said. Then what do you need from me right now, tonight, in this room? Dante crossed to the desk. He picked up a manila folder thin, the kind that holds 3 or 4 pages at most, and held it out toward her. I need you to read this, he said, and then I need you to decide something. She took the folder. She opened it. The first page was a legal document. Trust language, the specific dense architecture of financial instruments drafted by people who are paid to make things permanent. Her name appeared 3 times in the first paragraph. N. Bellamy, Donner 417. The language was careful and cold, and it had been written by someone who understood that caring about a thing and writing a legal document about it required completely different parts of the brain. The second page was a letter, handwritten. Not recent, the paper had the slight yellowing of something that had been in a folder for a long time. The handwriting was precise and slightly cramped, the handwriting of a man who had learned to write formally and had never fully relaxed the habit. She read it. It was not long. 11 lines. It said, in the specific stripped language of a person writing to someone they are not sure will ever read it, that he understood he owed her something that could not be accurately quantified, and that he intended to try anyway. That the anonymity she'd chosen would be respected. That if she was ever found, and if she was willing, he wanted her to know that the debt was not abstract to him. That it was the most concrete thing he carried. The last line said, I hope you're well. I hope your life has been larger than what you gave up for mine. Nia stood in the study in the east wing of the Valeri estate at 11:20 at night and read 11 lines that had been written at some point in the last decade by a man who was currently standing 5 feet away from her watching her face. She closed the folder. Why are you showing me this now? She said. Because what I'm about to ask you to do, Dante said, puts you further into this situation. And I wanted you to have the full picture before I asked. What are you asking? Portelli needs the story to be simple, he said. Kept woman, a hidden relationship, something that makes me look like I've been compromised by something personal. The trust, your employment, tonight's public confrontation it assembles. He held her gaze. The counter to that story is a different story, one that's documented, clean, public, where your relationship to me has a clear, unambiguous, legitimate foundation that exists on the record. Nia looked at him. You want to make the donor relationship official. I want to establish the Bellamy Trust as a public, charitable instrument, he said. Tonight, if possible, Marcus has the documentation ready. Public charitable fund in your name, with a stated purpose, supporting medical donors, domestic workers, families in financial crisis resulting from medical decisions. Your name on it as founder, mine as initial benefactor. He paused. Takes the private trust and turns it into something that can't be used as a weapon because it's already visible. And it ties my name to yours publicly, she said. Yes, which is what you said Portelli would try to use. He can't weaponize a public charity the same way he can weaponize a private trust. The narrative changes. You're not a secret. You're not something I'm hiding. You're someone I publicly acknowledged a public debt to, in the most legitimate and visible way possible. Nia stood with the folder in her hands and thought about that. She thought about visibility, about the specific cost of it and the specific cost of the alternative. If I sign that document tonight, she said, my name is attached to yours. Publicly. Permanently. Yes. And the people who already know I exist, Portelli's people, they don't just go away because the story changes. No, he said, but the story they had is gone. And without the story, the pressure point loses pressure. And Gerald, she said. Gerald is a separate problem, Dante said. But a connected one, yes. She set the folder down on the desk between them. I need to see Caleb, she said. Dante nodded. She walked out of the study and down the hallway to the kitchen, where Caleb had finished the food and was now sitting with his elbows on the prep counter looking at his phone. He looked up when she came in, and she pulled a stool next to his and sat down, and for a moment she didn't say anything, and he didn't either, which had always been one of the things she appreciated most about her son, the understanding that silence was sometimes the conversation. Mom, he said finally. Yeah, are we safe? Right now, yes. Is that going to stay true? She looked at him. At his face, Duran's jaw, her eyes, the specific combination that had been making her chest ache since the day he was born and hadn't stopped. I'm working on it, she said. What do you have to do, he said. Something that's going to change some things. What things? How visible we are, she said. How much people know about us. Caleb looked at his phone for a moment. then set it down. Like good visible or bad visible, he said. Honest visible, she said. He considered this with the particular seriousness of a 13-year-old who had been thinking about seriousest things his whole life. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. The food here is still really good, he said. She kissed the top of his head. She went back to the study. Al Sanfient, she said. Marcus had the documents out before she finished the sentence. It took 11 minutes to execute the paperwork. Real pen, real signatures, the kind of documents that have notarization and witnesses, and language that exists in 3 copies, with one going to a vault. Nia signed her name 4 times and initialed twice, and when it was done, she set the pen down and felt, not relief, but the specific sensation of having crossed a threshold in a direction you can't uncross. Then Rinaldi's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 8 seconds, and looked at Dante. They moved Gerald, he said. New location. Portelli's warehouse on the west side. Dante's jaw tightened. When? 20 minutes ago. Which means someone tipped them, that we were looking, Marcus said. Which means someone else in this house, Rinaldi stopped. The implication sat in the room without needing completion. Dante looked at the door, then at the window, then at Rinaldi. Who knew we were tracking Gerald's locations? He said. Rinaldi's eyes moved to the left, a small, involuntary movement, and Dante caught it, and Nia caught Dante catching it. Rinaldi, Dante said. It wasn't intentional, Rinaldi said. His voice had changed. Something underneath the professional surface had shifted, and Nia could hear it, the specific vibration of a man who is about to say something that is going to cost him significantly. I made a call, an hour ago, before I understood the full picture. I was trying to, there's a man I've worked with, on the Portelli side, for years. We've traded information before. Clean trades. I thought I was buying us time. The room was very quiet. You told him we were looking for Gerald, Dante said. I asked him where Gerald was, Rinaldi said, which told him we didn't know. Dante looked at Rinaldi for a long time. Nia watched this and understood that she was watching something with significant history in it, not just the operational failure of a misplaced call, but the specific weight of a loyalty that has just publicly cracked in a room with witnesses. Get out, Dante said. Rinaldi left. The door closed. Marcus was already on his phone. Dante stood at the desk with both hands flat on the surface and his head slightly forward, and his breathing controlled in the way that controlled breathing is always evidence of something that needs controlling. The warehouse, Nia said. He looked up. How long before Gerald gives them what they need? She said. At this point, Dante said, he may already have. But you don't know. No. So there's still a window. Dante looked at her. Nia. There's a window, or there isn't, she said. Which is it? There's a window, Marcus said from across the room. Narrow. Then stop standing at the desk, she said to Dante. Something moved through his face fast and specific, and she filed it away, and then he straightened up and he was moving. The next 40 minutes happened the way the most intense 40 minutes of anyone's life happen, in fragments that were only comprehensible as a sequence in retrospect, while living them feeling like a series of individual present moments with no connective tissue between them. 4 men arrived at the service entrance. Not the gala security, different men, with the specific posture and economy of movement that meant they were not decorative. Dante spoke to them in a room Nia wasn't in, briefly. When he came back out, he had changed into dark clothing, and his face had settled into something she hadn't seen on it before, not different, exactly, but simplified. The way a face simplifies when the person wearing it has stripped away everything that isn't immediately relevant. He crossed to where she was standing in the corridor. You stay here, he said. Marcus stays with you. Caleb stays in the kitchen. What are you going to do, she said. Get Gerald back before Portelli finishes with him. And if Portelli's people are there, then we'll manage that. She looked at him. Manage. Yes, that's not an answer. It's the answer I have, he said. She held his gaze. She was aware specifically, acutely aware, that this was not a situation she had information or experience or training to navigate. She was a housekeeper from the South Side who had raised her son alone for 5 years on 40 hours a week, and a discipline about not spending more than she had. She was not equipped for this. And yet, take Marcus, she said. He's more useful to you out there than standing here, watching me not panic. Dante looked at her. I'm not leaving you without. Rinaldi's still in the building, she said. Whatever he did it because he misjudged the situation, not because he's with Portelli. Use him and take Marcus. Dante looked at her for 3 seconds. You're sure, he said. I'm not sure about anything tonight, she said. Take Marcus. He took Marcus. The service entrance closed. The house was suddenly profoundly quieter. Nia stood in the east wing corridor for a moment, just breathing, and then she went to the kitchen, and she sat next to Caleb. And she did not look at her phone, and she did not pace, and she did not do any of the things her nervous system was strongly suggesting, because she had made a decision tonight about what version of herself was operating going forward, and that version did not fall apart in kitchens while waiting. Caleb fell asleep on the stool sometime around midnight, with his cheek on his folded arms. She put the jacket, Dante's jacket, she'd brought it from the study over his shoulders. She sat next to him in the warm kitchen that smelled like the end of a catering service, and she waited. At 12:47, her phone, she'd found it in her coat pocket in the staging kitchen, where she'd left it before the gala buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Miss Bellamy. The voice was male, smooth, the kind of smooth that was a practiced quality rather than a natural one. I apologize for the hour. She said nothing. My name isn't important, the voice said. What's important is that you understand the position you're currently in. You've signed documents tonight that attach your name to Dante Valeri's in a way that is going to have consequences for you that he is not in a position to fully protect you from. How did you get this number? She said. Gerald Howell had your employment file, the voice said. He was helpful. She kept her voice flat. What do you want? Conversation, the voice said. Not tonight. Tomorrow. Somewhere public, somewhere you're comfortable. I'm not interested in threatening you, Ms. Bellamy. I'm interested in making sure you have complete information before you've committed yourself to something you can't walk back from. I've already committed, she said. You signed papers an hour ago, the voice said. Papers can be unsigned. Trusts can be dissolved. The documents you executed tonight don't become public record until they're filed, and they won't be filed until morning. You have time. Nia looked at Caleb, sleeping next to her. And what does walking back from it look like, she said. Specifically, it looks like your life, the voice said. Your regular, private, safe life. Your son's school. His schedule. The things that matter to a mother. You just described a threat, she said. I described a contrast, the voice said. The contrast between a life where you are connected to Dante Valeri, publicly and permanently, with all the instability that connection brings, and a life where tonight was an incident that has been resolved, and you've returned to your ordinary circumstances. And what do you get from that, she said. Nothing you need to worry about, the voice said. That's not how negotiation works, she said. I need to know the cost on your side, or the deal doesn't make sense. Pause. Slight recalibrating. Smart, the voice said. What do you get? She said. Dante withdraws from the Southside contract, the voice said. You go home. Everyone's life simplifies. And Gerald Howell, she said. Gerald is fine, the voice said. Gerald made a choice that benefits him. He'll be fine. And if I say no, she said. Then, tomorrow morning, the story that assembles from what Gerald's already told us gets distributed to the people who find it most useful, the voice said. And you discover what it means to be publicly attached to a man whose enemies have decided to be creative about the attachment. I want to think about it, she said. Of course, the voice said. You have until 6 a.m. The call ended. Nia set her phone on the counter. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked it up and called the number Marcus had given her before he left. It rang 4 times before he answered. Background noise, a car interior. Road sound. Ms. Bellamy. They called me, she said. Portelli's people. A beat. What did they want? She told him, all of it. The voice, the offer, the deadline. She kept it accurate and sequential, and she did not editorialize. When she finished, there was a pause. Are you all right? Marcus said. I need you to tell Dante, she said. I will. And I need you to tell him. She stopped. Organized. Tell him I'm not walking it back. I want him to know that before he makes whatever decision he's making out there. The documents stand. A longer pause. I'll tell him, Marcus said. How's it going out there, she said. We found Gerald, Marcus said. Is he alive? Marcus said. Complicated, but alive. And Dante, handling it, Marcus said. She wanted to ask what handling it meant. She didn't, because she already understood enough about the world she'd signed her name into tonight to know that handling it covered a range of things, and that knowing the specifics was not going to make her more useful, and make her functional, and might make her less functional. And she needed to be functional. Call me when you're heading back, she said. Yes, he said. She hung up. She sat in the kitchen. At 1:15, Caleb stirred, lifted his head, looked at her with sleep-blurred eyes. Mom, go back to sleep. Is it over? Not yet. He put his head back down. She sat. At 2:08, she heard the service entrance. Footsteps in the corridor, more than 2 people. Uneven rhythm. Someone was moving differently than they'd arrived. She stood up. Dante came through the kitchen door. He had a cut above his left eyebrow, not deep, the kind that had bled and been roughly dealt with and was done bleeding. His dark clothing was undamaged, which meant the cut was isolated, which meant whatever had happened was controlled rather than chaotic. He had the specific stillness of a man coming down from adrenaline, the contained exhaustion of someone who has been running on pure decision-making for 2 hours. He stopped when he saw her standing. Gerald, she said. With our people, he said. He's not going to be a problem going forward. Portelli's people. Left, he said. They decided the situation wasn't worth the escalation tonight. Did you make that decision for them? She said. He looked at her for a moment. Yes. She nodded. Marcus told me about the call, he said. Okay, you didn't have to. I know I didn't have to, she said. Stop saying that to me. He stopped. Caleb had woken up at the sound of the door and was sitting up, looking at Dante with the specific, assessing look of a 13-year-old who has been waiting in a kitchen for 3 hours and is not going to pretend he doesn't have opinions about the man who just walked in with a cut above his eye. You're bleeding, Caleb said. Dante looked at him. A little, he said. Caleb considered this. There's a first aid kit under the counter, he said. Second cabinet from the left. I found it earlier. Something moved through Dante's face that was not quite a smile, but existed in the same territory. Thank you, he said. You should clean it, Caleb said. I will. Caleb looked at Nia. Is this the person whose house this is? Yes, she said. Okay, Caleb said. He looked back at Dante. Why did someone hit you, Caleb? Nia said. I'm asking, Caleb said. Dante looked at the boy for a moment, not with the discomfort adults sometimes displayed when confronted with direct questions from children, but with the specific attention of a man who understood that the question deserved a real answer. Because I had something they wanted, Dante said. And I didn't give it to them. Caleb thought about this. Did you get it back, he said. Yes, Dante said. Okay, Caleb said. He lay back down on his arms. Dante looked at Nia. I'll get the first aid kit, she said. You don't? Sit down, she said, before you fall down. He sat down. She got the kit from the second cabinet on the left, and she opened it, and she cleaned the cut above his eyebrow with the specific practical efficiency of a woman who had cleaned and bandaged a 13-year-old's injuries for years and had learned to do it without commentary. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He sat on the kitchen stool with his hands flat on the counter and let her work, and she was aware. In the particular way you're aware of things, when you are very close to someone and doing something that requires concentration of his breathing, which was slower than it had been when he walked in, and of the specific tension in his jaw, which was the tension of a man who has more things to say than he's currently saying. She put a butterfly closure over the cut. She stepped back. He looked up at her. The deadline, he said. Portelli gave you 6A. Yes. It's 2:30 now. I know. The documents will be filed when the county office opens, he said. At 7, which means between 6 and 7, Portelli has a window to make a move. Kind of move, she said. The kind that doesn't require Gerald's information, he said. The direct kind. She looked at him. You mean someone comes here, she said. Or somewhere you would go, he said. If you left. I'm not leaving, she said. He held her gaze. This isn't, he stopped. Started over. What I'm describing tonight is not how things normally operate. This level of direct action, this fast Portelli, is moving outside his normal pattern. Which means something specific is driving it. The Southside contract, yes, but something underneath the contract that we don't have the full picture on yet. What do you think it is, she said. I think the timing of tonight wasn't coincidental, he said. I think Gerald Howell has been positioned inside this house for long enough that he knew what Bianca was like, knew what the gala looked like, knew that Bianca and I have had escalating tension for 2 years over exactly this type of behavior. I think someone calculated that a gala, with the right provocation, with the right guess that the scar would come out, that the secret would come out. He paused. I think Portelli knew about you before tonight. And I think tonight was staged to force the exposure. Nia stood completely still. Gerald was managing the staff assignments, she said slowly. He put me on champagne service, east side of the ballroom, which is where Bianca was also positioned, Dante said. Yes, and Bianca didn't know, she said. I don't believe Bianca knew, he said. Bianca did what Bianca does. She was the instrument. She didn't know she was an instrument. Nia thought about this, about the assignment sheet, the east side of the ballroom. The position that crossed directly into Bianca Serrano's path. At the moment, Bianca had too much champagne and too much grievance, and was looking for something to spend her cruelty on. About the fact that Gerald Howell had handed her that assignment sheet without making eye contact. About how long Gerald Howell had been in this house. About whether any of the last 2 years had been as accidental as she'd believed. She sat down on the stool next to Dante's. The kitchen was quiet. Caleb's breathing was even. I need you to tell me something, she said. Ask it. The timing of my placement, she said. The agency that sent me here. 2 years ago. Do you know which agency? Dante looked at her. Something moved through his face. A specific quality of stillness. Tell me, she said. The agency your placement came through, he said, has a board of directors that includes 3 people who also have financial relationships with a holding company. That he stopped. That connects to Portelli, she said. Yes, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. Nia sat with this. She sat with the understanding that the job she'd taken 2 years ago, the job she'd convinced herself was coincidence and managed by maintaining careful distance, had not been coincidence. That she had been placed. That someone had known who she was before she walked through the service entrance, had known about the donor file, had known about the connection, and had positioned her inside this house with the long patience of a chess player, setting up a move that takes 2 years to execute. That the careful distance she'd maintained had been irrelevant. That the invisibility she'd cultivated had been permitted. That she had been for 2 years exactly as visible as Gerald Howell needed her to be. Something moved through her, not panic, not rage, something colder and more structural than either of those. The specific internal movement of a person whose understanding of their own recent history has just been fundamentally restructured against their will. For 2 years, she said. Her voice was very quiet. For 2 years I didn't know, Dante said. His voice was the specific voice of a man saying something true that he understands is insufficient. I want to be clear that I did not know you were here. I did not arrange your placement. If I had known you were here, I would have. He stopped. She looked at him. What? She said. What would you have done? He held her gaze. I don't know, he said, honest. I would have done something. Something different than what happened. He paused. Something that involved telling you who I was before you'd spent 2 years cleaning my house. Nia looked at the counter. At the first aid kit she'd opened to clean the cut above his eye. At the jacket on Caleb's shoulders. At the documents, copies of them, in the folder Marcus had left on the counter, with her name on them 4 times, and his name beside them. Person who arranged my placement, she said. They knew about the scar. Yes. They knew that if the right situation produced the right confrontation, the scar would come out. Yes. And they knew what would happen when you saw it. Dante was quiet. They knew what you would do, she said. They staged a situation that they knew would make you publicly defend me and publicly acknowledge the connection. They manufactured the exposure, and then they waited to use it. Yes, he said. Which means, she said, they understood you well enough to predict that you would publicly kneel in front of a housekeeper in front of 300 people the moment you understood who she was. Dante looked at her. She looked back. That's either, she said slowly, a very specific exploitation of your character. Or it's a bet on who I am, he said. Yes, she said. Which means Portelli and Gerald and whoever built this, they believe they know who you are. What you'd do, how you'd respond. And they may be right, he said. Are they, she said? He held her gaze. I publicly identified the most significant personal debt I carry in a room with 300 witnesses, he said. I had Gerald's location by 11 and chose to wait until I had full information rather than move immediately. I let Rinaldi back in the building after he compromised our position because I've known him for 12 years, and I made a judgment call about his loyalty versus his mistake. He paused. So yes, they may know me well enough. But they didn't predict me, she said. He looked at her. They predicted a woman who would be grateful, she said. Who would be overwhelmed by the gesture, the trust, the defense in the ballroom. Who would sign whatever was put in front of her because she was scared and out of options. She kept her voice level. They didn't predict someone who'd tell you to take Marcus when you offered to leave security. Who'd stay on the phone with Portelli's man for 6 minutes extracting information and then call Marcus the moment it ended. She paused. They built a plan around who they thought I was. And who are you, he said. She looked at him directly. Someone who spent 11 years doing the math, she said. I'm very good at the math. At that exact moment, Marcus came through the service corridor door, and his face had the specific compression of a man carrying information at speed. Portelli moved up the timeline, he said. He was breathing harder than normal. 6 a.m. is no longer the deadline. He's filing the documents he has from Gerald in the next 90 minutes. County recorder opens at 4 a.m. for emergency filings. If our documents aren't filed first, how long do we have, Dante said. He was on his feet. 40 minutes, Marcus said. Maybe less. The notarized copies, Nia said. In the folder, Dante said. County recorder's office, she said. Where? Downtown. 20 minutes with no traffic. It's 3 a.m., she said. There's no traffic. I have my name on those documents, she said. I go, Marcus drives. Absolutely not, Dante said. Portelli's people are watching this building, she said. They're not watching a car with me and Marcus in it, heading toward a county building. Because they don't think I'd do this. They think I'm sitting in a kitchen, waiting for the deadline. Because that's the rational thing to do, Marcus said carefully. Then I'll be irrational, she said. Dante looked at her. She looked back. If they follow the car, he said. Then you send people after the car, she said. But they won't. Because they don't think I'm capable of making this move. That's the entire premise of their plan. They built it on the assumption that I'm someone who waits for permission. Dante's jaw worked. Marcus, he said. I can have her there in 18 minutes, Marcus said. The back route, Dante said. The garage exit, not the service entrance. Yes. Dante looked at Nia. She picked up the folder. She looked at Caleb, still sleeping, still breathing, jacket on his shoulders. She looked at Dante Valeri with the cut above his eye, and the dark clothing and the face of a man who had spent 15 years making decisions and was currently experiencing, she suspected, the specific discomfort of being in a situation where someone else was making the one that mattered most. He's fine, she said, meaning Caleb. Rinaldi's here. Dante said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, call me the moment you're inside the building. I will, she said. She walked out of the kitchen with the folder, and Marcus moved ahead of her down the corridor toward the garage exit. And behind her, she heard Dante say something in Italian, low and fast, and she didn't know what it meant, but she filed the sound of it away, with everything else she was carrying from this evening, and she kept walking. The garage was cold, a dark SUV, Marcus in the driver's seat before she'd fully closed her door. The garage door rising with the mechanical slowness of things that operate on their own schedule regardless of urgency. She held the folder in her lap with both hands. She did not look at her phone. She looked straight ahead at the garage door rising, and at the dark driveway beyond it, and at the city past the gates Chicago at 3 in the morning. Orange lit and indifferent, and completely unaware that a woman in a borrowed jacket with a first aid bandage on her shoulder was about to drive downtown to file documents that would determine what the next chapter of her life looked like. Marcus pulled out of the garage. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then Marcus said, "For what it's worth." She waited. "In 14 years," he said, "I have never seen him hand someone that letter." She looked out the window at the city moving past. "Drive faster," she said. Marcus drove faster. The downtown streets were empty and orange, and the SUV moved through them like the only thing that mattered in a city that was holding its breath. And Nia sat with the folder and the cut on her shoulder, and 11 years of a number and 2 years of invisibility, and one evening that had. The county recorder's office smelled like fluorescent lighting and old paper and the specific institutional indifference of a building that processes paperwork at 4 in the morning with the same bureaucratic neutrality it applies to 4 in the afternoon. Marcus parked in the drop-off zone at 3:19. Nia was out of the car before it fully stopped. The night clerk was a heavy-set man in his 50s who looked up from a crossword puzzle with the expression of someone who had seen everything that Chicago's night could produce and had opinions about none of it. She slid the folder across the counter. He looked at it. He looked at her, the torn collar visible above the jacket she'd borrowed back from Caleb before leaving the kitchen, the bandaged shoulder, the face of a woman who had been awake for 22 hours and was operating on something that was not coffee. "Emergency filing," she said. "Nature of the document," he said. "Charitable trust establishment," she said. "Public record." "Time sensitive." He looked at the folder. He looked at the clock on the wall behind her, which said 3:21. He looked back at his crossword. "Processing takes 8 minutes," he said. "I have 8 minutes," she said. He took the folder. She stood at the counter, and she did not pace, and she did not check her phone, and she breathed the way she'd been breathing since Marcus pulled out of the garage deliberately, one breath at a time, the way her grandmother had taught her to breathe through hard things when she was 7 years old. "You don't breathe through the whole hard thing at once," her grandmother had said. "You just breathe through the next second, then the one after." She breathed through 8 minutes of seconds. At 3:29, the clerk stamped the documents, made 2 copies, returned the originals in a manila envelope, and slid a receipt across the counter. "Time of filing, 3:29 a.m. She called Dante. He answered before the first ring completed. "It's filed," she said. A pause, 3 seconds. The specific quality of silence that lives in a person's chest when something they've been holding releases. "Good," he said. "What's happening there?" she said. "Quiet," he said. "Portelli's people haven't moved on the building." "They won't," she said. "Not now. Whatever Gerald gave them, it's not useful anymore." The story changed. "Yes," he said. "I'll be back in 20 minutes," she said. "Caleb's still asleep," he said. She stood at the counter in the county recorder's office at 3:30 in the morning and felt something move through her that she didn't try to name. She just felt it and let it pass and put the receipt in the manila envelope with the documents. "Okay," she said. She hung up. Marcus drove her back through the empty orange city, and neither of them spoke, and it was the most comfortable silence she'd been in since she walked into the Valeri estate at 7:58 the previous evening with a heavy tray of crystal glasses and a practiced invisibility that had lasted approximately 74 minutes before a red gown and a glass of wine undid 11 years of careful architecture. Caleb slept through the return. He was still on the kitchen stool when she came back, jacket on his shoulders, cheek on his folded arms, the specific boneless sleep of a teenage boy who has burned through adrenaline and landed hard. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and just looked at him the way she looked at him, sometimes when he was sleeping, and couldn't see her, looking with the full, unguarded inventory of love that she kept at a managed volume during waking hours because it was too large to carry openly without it interfering with everything else she needed to carry. Dante was at the kitchen counter with a glass of water and the first aid kit still open beside him. He'd cleaned the cut again, or someone had the butterfly closure was neater than she'd left it, which meant he'd redone it himself, which meant he'd been doing something in the kitchen while she was gone beyond sitting still. He looked at her when she came in. She held up the manila envelope. He nodded. She set the envelope on the counter and sat down on the stool across from him. And for a moment, they were both just in the kitchen at 3:40 in the morning, with the cold fluorescent light and the smell of the end of a catering service, and Calebson breathing softly between them. Gerald talked, Dante said, before we got to him. Marcus confirmed it on the drive back. How much? She said. Enough that Portelli's picture was most complete, he said. Private trust, your employment history, the scar, tonight's confrontation. He paused. But not the documents. He didn't know about the documents because I hadn't decided on them yet when Gerald left the building. So Portelli had a story with no provable foundation, she said. Had, Dante said. Past tense. Because the foundation he was building on the private, undocumented nature of the trust no longer exists. It's a matter of public record now. He looked at the envelope. A publicly filed charitable instrument in your name with a stated civic purpose and a news release that Zmosmarskas will send to 4 outlets at 7A. A news release, she said, announcing the Bellamy House initiative, he said. With you as community director. He held her gaze. If you want it. She looked at him. We talked about this in the ballroom, she said. We talked about the concept, he said. I'm asking about the reality. The reality is that it's a real position, with a real salary, with real work to do. It's not a gesture. It's not me taking care of you. It's me investing in something you're qualified to run. How do you know I'm qualified, she said. Because I've watched you manage a household of 34 people for 2 years in a way that Gerald Howell got credit for, he said. Because you extracted actionable intelligence from a hostile phone call at 1 in the morning while sitting next to your sleeping son. Because you made a unilateral decision tonight that outmaneuvered a plan someone spent 2 years building. He paused. That's not a housekeeper. That's a director. Nia looked at her hands on the counter. She thought about Gerald Howell, handing her the assignment sheet. About the 11 complaints he'd buried. About the women and men who had absorbed cruelty in this house because they needed 40 hours a week and couldn't afford the cost of speaking. She thought about what it would mean to build something in this city that addressed exactly that, the specific vulnerability of people who couldn't afford to speak. Staff, she said. The 11 complaints. Every person is being contacted tomorrow, Dante said. Every situation reviewed. Compensation where it's owed. Gerald will face consequences through the appropriate channels, civil and otherwise. He paused. And the estate management will be restructured differently. The people who were afraid, she said, they need to know it's not going to happen again. Not just told, structurally shown. That's what I need you to help build, he said. Nia sat with that, with the weight of it and the shape of it, and the very specific way it connected to everything she'd carried for 11 years, the decision at 22, the complications, the years of rebuilding, Duran, Caleb, the bus rides, the careful invisibility, all of it arriving at this kitchen at 3:45 in the morning as a question about what she was willing to do with what she'd survived. Bianca, she said, is no longer my concern, he said. She will be, she said. The decision you made tonight cutting off her access, she's not going to absorb that quietly. She'll find ways to make noise. Let her, he said. I'm not saying stop her, she said. I'm saying prepare for it. The noise is coming. Don't let it surprise you into a reaction that undoes what you did tonight. He looked at her. You're giving me strategic advice, he said. Someone has to, she said. Something moved through his face, then genuine, not managed, the real version of the thing she'd been seeing, compressed versions of all evening. It wasn't a smile exactly, but it was adjacent to one, and it sat in his eyes rather than his mouth, which was how she knew it was real. The Portelli contract, she said, the South Side routes. Are you withdrawing? No, he said. They'll push back, she said. They'll try, he said. But without Gerald inside this house, without the private trust as a weapon, without the story they built, they're pushing from a weaker position than they had yesterday. He paused. And I'll know they're pushing, which is better than not knowing. Gerald was in your house for 7 years, she said. How do you make sure the next Gerald isn't already somewhere in your operation? Dante was quiet. That's the part I don't have a clean answer to, he said. Good, she said. Don't pretend you do. He looked at her. Why good? Because people with clean answers to everything stop looking for the real ones, she said. My husband said that. He was right about most things. A beat. He sounds like he was, Dante said. He was, she said. She said it simply, without the scaffolding she sometimes built around statements about Duran in conversation with people who didn't know how to hold it. He would have hated tonight for the record. He hated events with good silverware. Why, Dante said. He said anyone who ate with that many forks was compensating for something, she said. Dante looked at the kitchen counter for a moment. He wasn't wrong, he said. Nia almost laughed. Almost. It came out as a breath that was shaped like a laugh, which was close enough for 3:45 in the morning after the night they'd had. Caleb stirred. He lifted his head, looked at both of them with the squinting assessment of someone assembling reality from partial information. Is it over? He said. It was the same question he'd asked before. But it meant something different now. Nia looked at Dante. Dante looked at Nia. The hardest part is, she said to her son. Caleb absorbed this. He looked at Dante. Your eye looks better, he said. Your mother cleaned it, Dante said. She's good at that, Caleb said. She fixed my collarbone when I broke it in 6th grade before the hospital even looked at it. He paused. She said it would hurt less if I knew what she was doing before she did it. So she told me every step. Dante looked at Nia. She looked at the counter. Can I go to an actual bed? Caleb said. Yes, Nia said. One of Rinaldi's men appeared at the kitchen doorway to show him to a room, and Caleb stood up and retrieved the jacket, Dante's jacket, and held it out toward Dante across the kitchen. Thank you, Caleb said, polite and direct, the way she'd raised him. Dante took the jacket. Sleep well, he said. Caleb looked at him for a moment with the unfiltered assessment of a 13-year-old boy who is deciding something about a man he has just met under the strangest possible circumstances. Okay, Caleb said, and he left. The kitchen was very quiet. Nia looked at the manila envelope on the counter, at the first aid kit, at the glass of water Dante had been holding when she came back. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask it. When they placed me here, she said. When Portelli's people arranged my placement through the agency, they would have needed to know about the donor file. My name, the connection. She paused. The file was sealed. Yes, Dante said. So someone accessed it, she said. From the hospital side, or from your side. I've been thinking about that since 2A. He said. And she said. And the investigators I hired 11 years ago, he said slowly. One of them is a man who has subsequently done work for multiple clients, some of whom have relationships with Portelli. He paused. I believe he found you and sold the information. Not to me. To someone who understood its value better than he did. Nia sat with this, with the understanding that the investigator Dante had hired to find her out of genuine debt had inadvertently handed her location and identity to the people who'd spent 2 years using her as a piece on a board she couldn't see. So your search for me, she said. That's what led them to me. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. She looked at the counter. I'm not saying that to... He started. I know, she said. I know you're not. The debt compounds, he said. I understand that. She shook her head, not in disagreement. In the specific motion of someone releasing something that isn't worth the energy of holding. It was going to find me eventually, she said, whatever I had built around it. She looked at the envelope. Maybe this is just what finding me looks like. He looked at her. Messy, she added. Yes, he said, messy. She stood up. She was exhausted in a way that went below the physical, the kind of exhaustion that lives in the decision-making centers of the brain after they have been run at full capacity for 6 hours without a break. Her shoulder ached at the seam. Her eyes felt like they had been open for a year. She picked up the manila envelope. I'm going to sleep, she said. And tomorrow I'm going to need coffee before anything else happens. The kitchen has everything, he said. I know, she said. I stocked it. He looked at her. I stocked it every Monday for 2 years, she said. I know exactly what's in there. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know you existed in this house, he said. For 2 years. That's the part I keep. He stopped. I should have known. I should have been paying attention to the people who were here. You were paying attention to the people you thought mattered, she said. That's a different problem, older than tonight. Yes, he said. Fix it, she said. Don't just feel bad about it. Fix it. He held her gaze. Is that what you did? He said. After everything, you just fixed it. I tried, she said. Some of it. Some of it you can't fix. You just carry it differently over time. She looked at him. Scar doesn't go away. You learn to wear clothes that fit over it. He stood up from the counter. They were standing in the kitchen at 4 in the morning with the fluorescent light and the empty catering trays and the first aid kit and the years between them, 11 of them, stacked and complicated, built on a decision she'd made at 22 on an operating table that had been simpler in the moment than everything it became. The letter, she said, the handwritten one in the folder. I want to keep it. It was written for you, he said. I know, she said. I'm telling you I'm keeping it. Not asking. Something moved through his face. Okay, he said. She tucked the envelope under her arm. She walked to the kitchen doorway and stopped. She turned back. The Bellamy House Initiative, she said. Yes, he said. I want final say on the program structure, she said. Staff hiring, grant criteria, community partnerships. My name is on it, I run it. Yes, he said. And my salary comes from the charitable fund, she said. Not from you personally. The distinction matters to you, he said. The distinction is the whole thing, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Agreed, he said. She nodded. She stood in the doorway for one more second. Kitchen behind her, the dark corridor ahead. Dante, she said. Yes, you were right about one thing, she said. Tonight, whatever it cost, whatever it broke, I was seen. In there, in front of all of them. She touched the bandage on her shoulder without looking at it. Not the scar, me. She paused. That matters, even with everything else. He looked at her across the kitchen in the 4A. Light. It should have mattered sooner, he said. Most things should, she said. That's not a reason not to start. She went down the corridor. She found the room Marcus had told her about before he left, a guest room in the east wing, plain and clean, with a window that looked out over the side garden where the gala lights were finally off and the dark was just dark. Ordinary dark, the kind that didn't mean anything except that the night had finally run out of events to produce. She set the envelope on the nightstand. She did not shower. She did not change. She was still in the uniform with the torn collar, the jacket gone now, the scar visible above the collarbone, in the room's dark, the way it was always visible to her, even when no one else could see it, the permanent record of a morning at 22, when she'd signed a form and lain down on a table and given something. That had turned out to be the beginning of the most complicated story of her life. She lay down on top of the covers. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the gala, and about Bianca's hand on her collar, and about the sound of the fabric tearing, and about 300 faces turning toward the scar with the particular, focused attention of people who have just seen something they weren't supposed to see. She thought about Dante at the top of the staircase. She thought about what it had felt like in the single second between the tear and the gasp to be fully exposed after 11 years of careful coverage, and how that feeling had been terror and something else at the same time, something she hadn't had a word for in the moment. She had a word for it now. Relief. Not because the hiding was over. Not because she'd wanted it to end that way, in that room, with those people. But because the thing she'd been carrying the weight of being known to herself, in a way no one else could see, had finally, in the most chaotic and public and undignified way possible, been set down somewhere outside her body. And she was still standing. That was the thing about the things you carry. Alone for 11 years, you start to believe that you're the only structure holding them up. That if you let go, they fall and take you with them. You build your life around the weight so completely that the weight becomes load-bearing. She had let go tonight. She was still here. Nia Bellamy, 33 years old, widowed, mother of one, community director of an organization that didn't exist yet, lay on a guest bed in a house. She'd cleaned every Monday for 2 years and looked at the ceiling and breathed. And somewhere down the corridor, her son was sleeping. And somewhere in the kitchen, a man she didn't fully know yet was sitting with a glass of water and the first aid kit and 11 years of a debt he'd been carrying with the same structural weight that she'd been carrying her side of it. Neither of them had carried it well. Neither of them had carried it wrong either. They just carried it separately, in the dark, not knowing the other one's weight was the same shape as their own. Outside the window, Chicago began its slow return from night to morning, the particular gray-pink shift of a city that has never once paused for the events happening inside any of its buildings. That will continue on its own enormous schedule, regardless of what gets broken or rebuilt or signed, at county recorder offices at 3:29 in the morning. She touched the scar. She didn't hide it or cover it. She just touched it the way you touch something that has always been there, not with grief, not with pride, just with the simple acknowledgement of its presence. The permanent record, the proof of a morning that had led, through a sequence of choices and accidents, and the specific cruelty of a woman in a red gown, to this room, this ceiling, this gray-pink light beginning at the window. She had been placed here to be used. She had ended up here on her own terms. The difference between those two things was the entire story. She closed her eyes. In the morning, there would be a news release. There would be phone calls and legal processes, and the slow, grinding machinery of accountability working its way through 11 buried complaints and one corrupted estate manager, and a family relationship that had cracked in front of witnesses in a way that didn't heal clean. There would be Caleb eating breakfast in the kitchen and asking questions she would answer honestly. All of them. Every detail he was old enough to hold. There would be work. Real work. The kind that required her to be visible and specific and exactly who she was, without the uniform, without the service entrance, without the practiced invisibility that had been both her protection and her cage. There would be a lot of difficult mornings. She had handled difficult mornings before. She breathed through the next second, then the one after. Outside the window, Chicago kept moving, indifferent and enormous, and entirely unaware that somewhere in a house on the North Shore, the woman they had watched be humiliated in a ballroom 10 hours earlier was lying in the dark touching the scar they'd all finally seen, not hiding it from the world or performing it for the world, but simply living inside it, which was, after 11 years, the only ending that had ever been true.